Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is story about what if Naruto steals forbidden scrolls for reviving Minato part 1. Before I start, please do support for more amazing content and comments for part 2. Do consider to subscribe my channel and share my video to your friends and check out the description as well. Let's start the video. Kurama had learned more about humans over the decades than he'd ever desired to. Being trapped in two jinchuriki one after another had seen to that. Always aware but never able to act. To escape. Freedom was his birthright from the moment he'd been formed of his progenitor's remains. He hated the ninja clans who had stolen that from him. He hated that he'd been enslaved by the Sharingan of Madara Uchiha. He hated that Hashirama Senju had managed to beat him. And he hated that Uzumaki wench who chose to seal him away in her body. Because he was too powerful for the clans to tolerate. Worthless insects. He tasted the briefest hint of freedom when Hashirama's wife finally died, but Kurama was immediately sealed into the girl. Kushina Uzumaki. His new vessel. The Uzumaki clan had been nearly annihilated years before, but somehow the ninja of the hidden leaf managed to find another child to contain him. Their chakra was annoyingly well suited to hold a tailed beast, full of vigor and admittedly impressive life force. For a human. Upon realizing the seals were beyond his ability to escape with sheer might, cursed Uzumaki sealing jutsus, Kurama sought a different path. If force did not work, cunning might serve his purposes. He watched. He learned. He waited, ever patient. The humans had many ridiculous customs and rules, and despite years of dormancy, they continued to monitor the seal that bound him closely. Kurama behaved for the time being. Kushina was young, impressionable, but she would not be taken in by his whispers and temptations. The girl was stubborn and strong-willed, and though she did not hate him, she was smart enough to know that separating Kurama from her body would kill her. Unfortunate, but not unsalvageable. He eventually gave up trying to tempt her and returned to watching. Not all of his vessels would be so annoyingly resilient. And then she became pregnant. Kurama felt it the moment the child was conceived. He saw an opportunity. As the infant grew in her belly, her strength was diverted to it rather than the seal. Still, he was patient, slowly easing his power against his prison to loosen the bonds. The humans were aware of this, but even with their attempts to keep him down, there was a chance he could still escape. He damn near managed it with Hashirama's wife when she gave birth decades earlier. Though he had failed, he had learned. Another chance had been offered to him. The months went by. Kurama was aware of tiny fractals of his chakra being drawn to the growing child. Interesting, that had not happened with his first host. The sealing jutsu was different for Kushina, so perhaps there was a new weakness forming as her pregnancy progressed. Perhaps he could capitalize on it when she went into labor. The moment came and Kurama summoned all of his strength in preparation to break free. And then the fucking Uchiha decided to ruin his chance. Oh, he was torn free of Kushina, sure, but he'd been enslaved to another master instead. Fighting when he wanted to flee from the ninja and disappear to the distant corners of the world where they would never find him again. Instead he was assaulting their village, smashing an anthill he cared nothing for. At some point, the Uchiha responsible for dragging him from Kushina was forced to relinquish control. Kurama was free at last, but pinned by the third Hokage, worthless old monkey. And an army's worth of skilled ninja. He killed many, but not fast enough to make his escape before the fourth Hokage showed up and warped him away. He saw the ceremonial altar with Kushina's infant atop it and realized their intentions. Minato dragged half of his chakra away with a Reaper death seal, damn the man. He was weakened, but he struck regardless. It wasn't enough. Kushina was dying, but she wasn't powerless. They managed to protect the infant, kept him pinned just long enough for Minato to trap him inside the child with the 8 trigrams. Kurama howled. The cage was strong, the newborn's latent power enough to sustain it despite his infancy. And he was weakened as never before, half of the mighty beast he used to be. He raged for days before finally calming. Or at least, his rage fell to a simmer. He was trapped again, yes. He was weakened, but he would recover in time. Minato and Kushina were dead, the Uchiha responsible dealt with possibly. Kurama made note of the man and decided to keep an ear out for any sign that he'd survived. The infant was named Naruto Uzumaki. Carried the name of Kushina's wretched clan rather than Minato's, some attempt to keep the clan from extinction, he imagined. Humans were such ridiculous things. Why keep the clan alive and going if you'd wanted it to be wiped off the face of the earth? The child had been influenced by his chakra within Kushina's womb, he confirmed. The whiskers were a small physical indication, but he was closely attuned to Kurama's chakra, and his reserves were even larger than his mother's had been. Kurama realized before long that while he was recovering his lost strength, he wouldn't be able to break free of this fresh powerful seal even, while the boy was nothing but a newborn. And yet there was opportunity, nonetheless. The child was much younger than any jinchuriki rightfully should be. Unlearned. He hadn't been indoctrinated to hate Kurama yet or to fear him and keep him trapped. The boy was malleable. Even though he wouldn't be able to break free, he began to press his chakra against the seal. All he had to do was weaken it just a little bit. By the time the boy was 3, Kurama was able to slip enough of his presence through the seal to initiate contact. When he had done this with Kushina, she'd been alarmed and worried that the seal was weakening, it had been. She'd promptly reported his activities to the Hokage, who'd ensured his attempts to break out were undone. The child could do none of those things, but more than that, he did not react to Kurama's steadily growing presence with alarm. If anything, he seemed calmer when the fox spirit brushed against his young mind. Naruto was still little more than a baby, but he was more aware than before and easily drawn into dreams. Kurama beckoned him with whispers of chakra, testing a theory for his own curiosity. In his mindscape, the child came closer and triumph filled the fox. His chakra was the only familiar thing the toddler could recall beyond his dead mother's heartbeat. Naruto was drawn to his presence. Perhaps he was even comforted by it. Good. Kurama encouraged him closer. He doubted the child could tear the seal free, too weak, too young, not trained, but there was worth in meeting him. The fox's claws slowly pushed through the bars of his cage and he allowed the infant to touch him. He said nothing for now. Naruto leaned against the talons that had slain his parents and was at ease. He drifted off into deeper dreams and Kurama's tails curled with satisfaction. More time passed. Naruto was ostracized by the village, much to Kurama's delight. They were pushing him away, the Hokage keeping tabs on him, but little more. He was enrolled in a school that he couldn't stand. Kurama drew the boy into dreams and taught the child himself. Endeared himself to his host, offered him a comforting ear and encouragement. He even told Naruto his name, it made him seem less terrifying in some ways. The boy learned to manipulate chakra before long. Kurama taught him that too. He debated taking the opportunity to convince Naruto to help weaken the seal so Kurama could help him yet further. But no. Kurama's own body was still recovering, the Reaper Death Seal's effects lingered stubbornly and he wasn't sure how much time it would take before his power fully recovered. Best to play it safe. The Uchiha were massacred by one of their own. That was splendid news as far as he was concerned. They used me, he told Naruto one night while the boy dreamed. The child frowned. How? The Uchiha possess a dojutsu called the Sharingan, a bloodline trait that manifests in their eyes, he explained further. They can wipe your mind with ninjutsu, take control of you, and use you for their own means if they are strong enough. Why would they do that to you? Because I am powerful, boy, Kurama rumbled. I was a tool in their eyes. Naruto scowled. They sound mean. Still a child. One of them was responsible for killing your mother, he said. Once, I was within her just as I am within you. He stole me from her. Removing me took a terrible toll on Kushina and she died. Her name was Kushina. Naruto's mind was racing. Kurama could sense his turmoil. His eyes finally darkened. I'm glad they're dead. Yes, Kurama purred. As am I. The girl was unexpected. Winter had come around and Naruto had been wandering the village at night. He despised seeing the villagers in the day, who were all too willing to shun him and feed the boy's resentment. Kurama had managed to speak with him outside of his dreams just a few times. The seal was not weak, but Naruto's own mind was steadily allowing the fox's influence out in bits and pieces. Progress. Naruto had found the girl crying alone in the snow. She'd been unafraid of him. Kurama spared her a lazy glance and paused, a Hyuga. The pearl-colored eyes were a dead giveaway. He'd not been particularly interested in the Hyuga in the past, but their ancestors had been fascinating enough before the old sage died. Kurama remembered their progenitor only vaguely. Naruto was used to being alone, often told Kurama that he wanted a friend. The fox had promised to be one for him, for his own gains, of course, though his inability to consistently speak with a child outside of his dreams made that somewhat restrictive. The girl was too shy to speak much, but she managed to guide Naruto back to the Hyuga compound. Still, it was a connection the child hadn't felt before, almost friendship. Kurama made a note of it. If she damaged his chances of escape, he'd sabotage what he could. For now, he said nothing on the matter. They ran into each other again later that same winter when a group of older children managed to isolate the girl and began to bully her. Naturally, Naruto took to that poorly and Kurama was always happy to feed his resentment for the people of the Hidden Leaf. He beat them down easily enough. Worthless ants. This time, she managed to speak words. Hinata Hyuga was the girl's name. She thanked Naruto and was even happy until the girl's caretaker showed up and nearly exploded upon seeing the boy near his charge. Kurama cracked an eye open, tails flicking slightly as the older Hyuga dragged a distraught Hinata away. Naruto could only watch, crestfallen and frustrated. Why did he do that? Naruto asked in his dreams that night. He sounded angry and disappointed. The adults fear you. They know about me, Kurama told him. They will never accept you, not so long as I exist. Screw them. What about? Perhaps she will be an exception. Perhaps not. He kept his options open. Hinata was of no interest to him, though if she fostered a friendship with Naruto well, it could break apart and bolster his resentment. There were other possibilities, of course, but it wasn't like they were going to see each other very often. He would keep watching. In the meantime, shall we learn something new tonight? Kurama suggested, and the boy grinned eagerly. More time passed and Naruto continued to grow. He was training in full to be a ninja now. Kurama fostered him in dreams at night and whispers during the day, sharpening his mind, lessons, and resentment. Honestly, the village did most of his work for him in terms of the latter. Naruto had gotten so sick of their hostility towards him that he took to shopping only at nights, taking what he needed from closed markets and leaving money behind for what he took. The Hokage had him set up in a small apartment and gave him a regular allowance, but did little else. Kurama was admittedly surprised by that. Maybe the old monkey was finally going senile, leaving the boy isolated in such a way. He wondered if there was an ulterior motive for that decision, possibilities running through his mind, but ultimately he couldn't think of anything. Well, all it would do was help Kurama escape. There was even a time when Naruto was shopping at night and was stopped by a ninja Kurama recognized as Hada Kakashi. "Why are you stealing?" "I'm not stealing. I'm paying for it." Naruto waved the money in his face and slapped it down on the empty counter as he shoved a loaf of bread into his bag. The ninja cocked his head slightly. "And why are you buying it in the dead of night?" "The asshole won't sell anything to me," Naruto scowled. "None of them will. Now can you leave me alone?" The ninja regarded him for a moment before he sighed. "If you want, I could buy you what you need during the day. I won't tell them I'm buying for you." Naruto's eyes narrowed suspiciously. Kurama's own whispers and the actions of the villagers over the years, the latter far more than the former, to his amusement, made trusting adults nigh impossible for the child. In this instance, he felt that Minato's old apprentice might be genuine in his desire to help. But Kurama did not like the idea of that. "He has a Sharingan," Kurama whispered in Naruto's ear. "The eye he covers holds the power of the Uchiha." Naruto's eyes widened for an instant before he scowled at Kakashi. "I don't want help from someone with a Sharingan." Kakashi's only visible eyebrow rose. "How do you know about that?" "None of your business," Naruto growled, holding his groceries close to him. "Stay away from me, creep." He ran off. Kurama felt a pulse of satisfaction when Kakashi didn't chase after him. Sasuke Uchiha was an unwelcome presence. Kurama was more than a little annoyed to learn that something, no matter how small and meaningless, of the Uchiha had, in fact, survived a brutal massacre years earlier. He thought them to be free of that damned disease of a clan. Apparently, he was wrong. Well, the child had some uses. Naruto despised him immediately. As soon as he found out who the other boy was, Kurama's host slapped a mental bullseye on him. More distrust in the village to foster. Most of the other children were of no interest to him. The Hyuga girl shared a class with Naruto, though. A prospect, if nothing else. Naruto got along with some of the other children, but he was never allowed to play with them. Their parents or caretakers would drag them away immediately after school, leaving the child alone. Kurama knew that only deepened his loneliness and anger. Hinata at least was happy to see him, if always shy. Naruto had worked up the courage to ask her to study with him during classes sometimes, and she'd been pleased to do so. He was a smart kid, naturally, since Kurama had been teaching him for years now. Ninjutsu and taijutsu came easily to him, though the intricacies of jinjutsu were too fine for his massive chakra reserves. Perhaps in time, when he had better control. He picked up on advanced jutsu for his age quickly enough. Kurama had taught him the simple shadow clone jutsu when the standard cloning technique proved to be worthless. He'd identified the boy's chakra type as wind, though he'd not begun to teach him elemental techniques yet. The teachers would fail him anyway despite his progress, save for one or two of them. Most of the adults hated Naruto, and the feeling was mutual. Produce a shadow clone instead of a normal clone. Wrong jutsu, failure, despite it being superior in every way. More anger. It was almost too easy. Naruto had been put on Team 7 under the leadership of Hada Kakashi and partnered with Sasuke Uchiha and some brat Kurama didn't care about. He suspected this was an intentional choice on the Hokage's part. Kakashi knew of Kurama's presence, though he doubted the ninja could actually stop him if he really managed to escape the seal. But the Uchiha boy, that was perhaps the greatest aggravation. What was he supposed to be? A deterrent? A tool, learning how to control Kurama if he ever snapped free. He shared his suspicions with Naruto, and it only fostered his dislike of them. Still, they had to play nice. Naruto wasn't so old and strong that he could flee the village and get away with it. They'd toyed with that idea before. Naruto wanted to get away from the village, away from its cruel people, and start a new life. Kurama honestly couldn't fault him for that. But they'd pushed the idea away for now. Naruto had too much to learn. Later perhaps. The boy had been briefly infatuated with his other teammate, Sakura, he managed to remember, but that faded swiftly when it was made clear her only interest was in Sasuke. Kurama gave her a month tops before she quit being a ninja. Soft, worthless child. If nothing else, it gave Naruto one more reason to dislike the Uchiha heir. Missions came and went. Some were more exciting than others. The seal had weakened enough for him to enhance Naruto's power. That came in handy more than once when the boy was forced to fight enemies he'd otherwise be ill-prepared for. Then came the Chunin exams. The wretched Sannin was an unexpected problem, though thankfully his interest was in the Uchiha brat and not Naruto. Unfortunately, he placed another seal over the 8 trigrams to shut Kurama away. The fox raged when it was burned into Naruto's flesh. It wouldn't undo the damage he dealt to the 8 trigrams, but it infuriated Kurama that Orochimaru had silenced him so. The 5-pronged seal was meant to be temporary, and Kurama viciously beat against it in the days following, pummeling Orochimaru's work into non-existence. Naruto managed to join him in his mindscape, and that added assistance allowed the pair to painstakingly break the jutsu down. Finally, Naruto tore away the last of the chains belonging to the 5-pronged seal in his mind, watching with satisfaction as it melted away. Stupid seal. Kurama rumbled in agreement. Naruto walked to the cage doors and set his hand on the fox's claw. Missed you. His tails lashed and Kurama was struck with something that was not anger. He vaguely realized he too had despised the silence between them. Not that he'd ever admitted. He grunted but said nothing more. Humans were so bizarre. Imagine hosting a tournament between villages where your children beat each other to death for promotions. Well, Naruto did well enough. The Inuzuka brat and his mutt weren't much of a challenge. He'd picked the simpleton's fighting style apart easily enough. He separated Kiba from Akamaru, crushed them with a small army of shadow clones, and a new wind-style jutsu Kurama had taught him. Easy. The other fights were of little interest. The Uchiha brat had been marked by Orochimaru with a curse seal, though its power was of no comparison to Kurama's. That the boy managed to suppress it was somewhat impressive, he supposed. Then Hinata was made to fight her cousin, Neji. Naruto had encouraged her when the girl showed fear and she made a valiant effort, but it was in vain. She was badly wounded. Naruto had been ready to throw himself at Neji in the aftermath, but Kurama halted him. Not yet, he murmured in the boy's mind. He will advance to the finals. Crush him before his peers, show him to be the worthless caged bird that he is. Naruto backed down after a moment's hesitation, though he fixed Neji with a vengeful stare. I'll hurt you for this. You are welcome to try, Neji answered arrogantly. Kurama felt a pulse of amusement run through him. Try, indeed. Naruto had left the fights then, choosing to sit outside the waiting room while Hinata was being healed. Kurama didn't mind, the other fighters were not. He felt something familiar. Kurama's senses sharpened and Naruto reacted to his growing awareness. What's wrong? I sense a presence, one I've not felt since Kurama trailed off before it hit him. Shukaku. What? Another tailed beast, like myself. The one tails, he hissed, tails lashing. His jinchuriki must be near. The second presence suddenly flickered to life as if in response, and Kurama froze for sheer surprise. Chime, 2. 7 tails. There's 2 more jinchuriki here. So it would seem, Kurama pondered the information for a moment. Are they dangerous? Naruto's eyes shot to the operating room where Hinata was being cared for. Of course that was what the boy was worried about. His only friend besides Kurama. Well, he wouldn't fault him for that seeing as the girl had been beaten to within an inch of her life. I don't imagine they will unleash themselves here. But we must be wary. Should we face them, they will undoubtedly be a nuisance. Naruto nodded slowly to himself, and Kurama ended their silent conversation in favor of sensing Shukaku and Chime's presences. The boy remained anxious and bristling all the while. In the aftermath, it was confirmed that Shukaku's jinchuriki was present. A boy named Gaara, roughly the same age as Naruto. His seal was far weaker, his host easily influenced. Kurama was immediately wary when he realized how degraded the host was. He's a bomb, the fox told Naruto grimly one night in the boy's mindscape. A bomb rigged to go off. That seal won't hold for long. Should we do something about it? That was a good question. They could alert the Hokage, not for the safety of the village, mind you neither Naruto or Kurama had much love for it. But Kurama knew well that for all that Naruto had progressed, he wasn't ready to face another tailed beast, even one as lowly as Shukaku. Kurama's seal was too strong for him to fully manifest. We should watch and wait for now. If they mean to free Shukaku, the Sand Village will be after war. They might try to capture you just to take control of me. Naruto scowled at the idea. We're not tools they can just take. We're people. I know, Kurama murmured. That Naruto included him as a person was a brief surprise, but the fox said nothing on the matter. For now, we should focus on your training. If Shukaku does emerge, you must be ready. What about the other one? The 7 tails Chime, right. If an opportunity arises, make contact with his jinchuriki. Let us see where they stand. But be wary. We can deal with a single-tailed beast. If they unite against us, there will be trouble. My power cannot fully manifest to protect you from them yet. The boy nodded and focused. Naruto took to training on his own after Kakashi ran off with Sasuke for private lessons. Favoritism? Maybe, but one way or another, it made Naruto irritated with the two of them. Whatever the case, they found out that Neji Hyuga was set to be Naruto's opponent in the next portion of the exams. The boy took to the news with grim determination. He was out for blood, and that pleased the fox. He started wearing his forehead protector differently, let it hang loose around his neck, like the Hyuga girl. A statement or a reminder of his desire to get revenge. He also finally got rid of that ridiculous burning orange jumpsuit. Naruto had gotten it a while ago because the color reminded him of Kurama, but the fox had finally beaten it into his head that the frankly offensive shade was the opposite of stealthy. Now he wore more suitable gear, darker colors, closer to the least typical ninja, though with a telltale spiral of the Uzumaki clan here and there. Kurama taught him in Kakashi's stead, helped the boy continue to master his wind-style jutsu, and learn a fire-style technique from the fox's personal repertoire. That took some work, but Naruto had immense latent power. Combined with Kurama's knowledge and his frankly absurd chakra reserves, the child picked up the new jutsu almost easily. Kurama had to admit he was a little proud that his host was doing so damned well. Shukaku wouldn't know what hit him, and he felt some glee at the idea of one-upping the Tanuki again. Of course, there were a few deviations. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Kurama asked from within his mind. Naruto answered with his thoughts. "I want to. Ask for her condition before you decide," the fox suggested. "It may be that you won't need my chakra for this. Here's hoping." Naruto slipped into the hospital as he often had every couple of days for the past few weeks. The nurses recognized him by now and offered brief smiles before going about their business. He appreciated that none of them seemed especially biased towards him being around. If they did have misgivings, they wisely kept it to themselves. Naruto found the room he was looking for and opened the door, peering inside. Hinata Hyuga was asleep in her bed, still hooked up to several monitors to keep track of her vitals. A nurse was by her side, observing her stats, and looked up when he knocked on the door to announce his arrival. "Ah, Naruto," she greeted. "Back again. I brought flowers," he offered the small bouquet as he quietly closed the door behind him. "Is that okay?" "Let me see," she held her hands out and he passed the flowers over. Violets he'd found in the mountains nearby. The nurse nodded, smiling kindly. "Yes, these should be safe. Just in time, the last ones you picked are starting to wither." She replaced said flowers with the new ones. Naruto shifted over to Hinata's side. Her face was slack, her slumber deep. "How is she?" "She's doing a little better today," the nurse admitted. "She was awake earlier." "Is she still coughing up blood?" She paused. "Not as much as before. But she's still hurt somewhere." "She suffered heavy internal damage," she reminded him gently. "Recovering from such wounds takes time." He mentally checked out for a moment to commune with Kurama. "What do you think?" "The healers were thorough with her, boy," the fox rumbled. "Really, the only thing you could do better is flood her system with my chakra. That's the only way to cover everything. I'd sit this one out. It sounds like she's on the mend." "I think you're right," he admitted reluctantly. Kurama knew, however, that he hated for the girl to be in pain. Besides himself, she was quite possibly the only being he shared a truly positive relationship with. But he'd lay off for now, at least. The door opened and he reflexively tensed, eyes flicking over to the source of the sound. He calmed when he realized it was just Kurenai, Kiba, Akamaru, and Shino. "Oh, Naruto." Kiba exclaimed with a grin. "You're here too, huh? SHH. He hissed, holding a finger to his lips. "She's asleep, numbskull." My bad," he hushed himself, rubbing a hand behind his head. His expression became serious as their group came over to the bed. "How is she?" "Nurse says she's a little better today," Naruto murmured. Said nurse nodded to confirm his words. "I see you beat us to bringing her new flowers," Kurenai noticed. Her tone was grateful. Naruto just shrugged uncomfortably. "Thought she might like them." "She does love purple," Shino agreed. All the talking, quiet or not, was enough to make the Hyuga Kunoichi twitch in her sleep, and then her eyes were sleepily opening up. Attention flew to her. "Rise and shine, sleeping beauty." Kiba grinned at her. Naruto felt like smacking him. His loud entrance was probably why she was awake in the first place. Hinata looked around blearily, but locked onto Naruto when she spotted him. "Naruto." She winced. Her throat was scratchy from disuse. He offered her an uncertain half-smile. "Good to see you awake." "Hey, where's our hello?" Kiba grumbled. "We're your team, you know." Akamaru barked agreement and Naruto again fought the urge to kick their asses the way he had at the Chunin exams. In his mind, Kurama let out a deep chuckle, evidently amused by his annoyance with the other genin. "Hi," she managed, obviously still pained when she spoke. The nurse brought her a glass of water, which Hinata slowly reached for. "Let's help you sit up, dear." The nurse got on one side and Naruto moved so Kurenai could take the other. They gently helped Hinata sit up, bunching pillows behind her for support. But she winced at one point and they both stopped. "Pain?" the nurse asked. "Why yes," Hinata's hand gingerly touched the left side of her torso. "Here. Might be a lung," the nurse muttered. Naruto was moving without thinking. His hand covered Hinata's over the spot she'd indicated and Kurama quietly sighed before letting his chakra trickle out. Kurenai must have sensed it because she grabbed his wrist tight. "What are you doing? Healing? You don't know healing jutsu. I don't need to with my chakra. It speeds up the healing process." Kurenai opened her mouth to object. He didn't really blame her, given that she was just as concerned for Hinata as he was, but her student stopped her. "It's going away. It doesn't hurt anymore." The nurse glanced at her vitals. Everything seemed stable. Kurenai hesitated, but Naruto pulled away before she could decide. "That should do it. It's not like I need a lot of chakra for small injuries." "Warn me next time," Kurenai insisted. "I will. I just didn't want her to." He trailed off. The Jonin seemed to get it and her grip on his arm loosened. "I understand." Hinata's pale face was flushed red. Naruto offered an apologetic look. "Sorry. You're sure it doesn't hurt anymore?" It doesn't hurt," she squeaked out. "I'm pretty tired, though." "Yeah, it takes a bit out of you depending on how much has to heal." "That's crazy. I didn't know you could heal wounds," Naruto Kiba exclaimed. He grimaced. "Don't spread it around. I don't do this a lot. We'll do a checkup soon anyways, so we'll be able to verify that you're healing properly, Ms. Hyuga," the nurse told her. "Thank you," Hinata replied, this time taking the cup that was offered and quenching her thirst. Satisfied that she was doing well, Naruto made for the door. "Then I'll be going." "Already? Didn't you just get here?" Kiba protested. "I'm taking a break from my training right now," he pointed out. "I have to get back to it. Gaara isn't going to be easy to deal with." "Aren't you fighting Neji first?" Shino asked. Naruto's expression darkened. "He won't be a problem." "Don't get overconfident," Kurenai warned. "No matter if you're angry with him, Neji has a full year of training on you. He's an incredibly skilled genin." "I know that. I have a plan." Naruto glanced back at them, zeroing in on Hinata. Her eyes drifted down and she seemed startled upon realizing that his forehead protector was wrapped around his neck, mirroring her. "I'll take him down." Her lips twitched into a tired smile and she simply nodded. Naruto slipped out of the hospital room and began the long walk to the training grounds. Kurama, of course, had to interject on the way. "You're getting soft. Look who's talking." "I just didn't want to deal with you whining if I refused to help." Naruto snorted. "Well, at least she's a good person." Their plan to track down the Seven Tails Jinchuriki at some point was put to the wayside when the girl in question sought them out herself. Her name was Fu of the hidden Whirlpool Village. A bundle of energy, spirited, cheerful, and loud just like the tailed beast within her. Naruto almost made a run for it when she got in his face, overly pleased to meet a fellow Jinchuriki. Kurama found himself snickering. The boy was utterly unprepared for her enthusiasm and blinked owlishly at her. She'd also passed the exams and would be fighting in the finals. A possible foe, but one Kurama felt could be bested. Chimei was strong, but his abilities generally leaned away from the raw, unstoppable attacks Kurama favored. He was a tricky one. The fox imagined his Jinchuriki would be much the same. They'd found an unoccupied training ground near the outskirts of the village and had begun to prepare for a spar, flexing the chakra of their respective tailed beasts when Jiraiya of the Sannin showed up. Kurama didn't know how to feel about that, frankly, but he was certainly wary. Jiraiya had been a steady, if not necessarily negative presence throughout Kurama's time with Mito and Kushina Uzumaki. He trained Minato, but to his knowledge, had never been involved with the tailed beasts. The old ninja was a hermit, though his power was certainly real. Both Jinchuriki were unsure of him, as were their tailed beasts, until the man told them he'd help with their training. Naruto had been the most skeptical of the bunch, up until Jiraiya summoned a frog with a scroll sealed around its body. "This is Jiratora. He holds the key to your 8-trigram seal." "What?" Fu's eyes were round as she watched the exchange. Naruto, and Kurama, internally, was staring at the scroll with surprise and definitely hunger. The fox initially thought it was a prank, but no, the chakra within that scroll matched that of his prison. He could feel it. Jiraiya snapped his fingers, and the key promptly disappeared. Kurama snarled, and Naruto was quick to protest. "Hey. Don't get too upset," the Sannin laughed. "I was entrusted with the key to help you master the power of the 9 tails. Though it seems you've already started down that path. How did you even get the key? A story for another time. I should think you'd want to focus on training right now." "Go with it for now," Kurama advised. "He may be irritating, but his power is real." Naruto sighed and nodded. Fu was shifting uncomfortably up until Jiraiya offered her a friendly grin. "Of course, you're welcome to join us, Miss Fu." Fu of the hidden waterfall, Jinchuriki of the 7 tails. Kurama snorted at the blunt answer and flabbergasted expression of the old ninja. So he could be caught off guard. Trust Chimei's Jinchuriki to pull a fast one. "This should be interesting," Jiraiya admitted. Their training went well for the next several days. Jiraiya was useful for helping the pair of young Jinchuriki learn how to fine-tune their control. It was something Kurama and Chimay, any tailed beast, frankly, weren't good at, admittedly. They rarely, if ever, needed to utilize fine control of their power. Why bother when you could obliterate entire forests with a flick of your tails? But it was good for their hosts, who had been much more wasteful with the massive chakra reserves they threw around so carelessly. Not perfection, but the improvement was visible. Fu's guardians, a pair of ninja who Kurama outright dismissed after sensing them for half a second, usually watched from a distance or with Jiraiya when the two jinchuriki were sparring. They were happy for her to make a new friend she could relate so closely to. And Naruto could relate to her as well. The two jinchuriki were flying through progress with one another, faster than Kurama could have anticipated. It was good for them. They were quick to strike up a tight friendship once they had adjusted to each other. One evening, while Naruto and Fu were lying in the grass catching their breath, Jiraiya had run them ragged through a training gauntlet involving two of his shadow clones. Kurama finally gave in to his own curiosity and reached out for his brother. Chimay eagerly responded and they found themselves in the shared mindscape belonging to all tailed beasts. I wondered if you were ever gonna chat with me, Chimay's wings fluttered cheerfully. It's been a while, Kurama. So it has. As much of a conversationalist as I remember, the huge beetle didn't sound disappointed in the slightest. I hope you've been well as I can be. And you? I don't recall Hashirama Senju capturing you. The first Hokage couldn't fly. Lucky me. But I was captured not long after you were. The hidden waterfall village is small, but it has quite a few powerful ninja to its name. They figured out that I don't like fire. The fox snorted. Imagine that. But you were lucky. Hashirama captured each and every one of us besides you and sold us like we were livestock to the other major villages. Even Chimay's friendly personality didn't stop the way his jaws clicked angrily. I wish I could have. Don't. Kurama stopped that train of thought with a growl. You couldn't have helped. Madatabi and Son went up against him 2-on-1 and the bastard still got them. He was as close to the old man of the six paths in terms of power as I've seen since the old days. True. But those powerful ninja are all dead and gone now. Even the strongest of them today can't compare. What game are you playing with the kid, anyhow? It's not like you to be so sociable. I played the force game with two jinchuriki before him and it never worked, the fox muttered. I decided to try something different. That's all. Besides, you're one to talk. Does your brat even have to ask for those wings? I'll have you know I like Fu. She can talk for hours. I never get bored with her around. I have noticed. You're still grumpy. Have you ever not been grumpy? Kurama resisted the urge to sigh. You aren't even trying to get free of her, are you? Are you trying to get free of Naruto? The fox opened his mouth to answer that and hesitated. Just for an instant, but he hesitated nonetheless. Of course. What? Nothing, Chimay's tails waved lazily. What about Shukaku? What about him? Don't pretend you don't know. His seal's barely intact. He's gonna bust out and it won't be pretty. He definitely knows you're here. That damn Tanuki couldn't beat me if he tried, Kurama sneered. We'll deal with him when the time comes. My jinchuriki and I. You can stay back and watch. I like this new you. You're more fun. The fox finally ran out of patience with his happy-go-lucky brethren, even if he felt no true malice for Chimay. Bah. Enough. I'll speak with you another time. Sure. See you. Kurama returned to his usual prison and closed his eyes. He needed a nap after that. Chimay was exhausting. The finals of the Chunin exams were upon them before they knew it. Naruto was fresh from a solid night's sleep. Kurama had fueled him with a little extra chakra just to be safe. They'd all felt the tension rising over the past few weeks. Even Fu and Chimay had become uneasy, like there was a blade hanging over their heads ready to drop at any second. Sasuke was missing, though Kurama barely noticed the Uchiha brat's absence. He was on high alert, sensing the trembling of Shukaku's nearby presence. Chimay, too, was wary. Their brother was chomping at the bit and ready to burst free. Fu and Naruto hung close to each other, tensing when Gaara finally approached them. Every other genin in the room froze like statues, probably ready to flee at a moment's notice. The three beasts within the jinchuriki sharpened their focus like blades. You're like me, Gaara's eyes were bloodshot. Demons, both of you. I can feel it. Speak for yourself, Fu's brow scrunched into a frown. When was the last time you slept? I don't sleep. Too much screaming. Has anyone ever told you you're an asshole, Shukaku? Naruto scowled. The other two sand ninjas' eyes bulged with fear. The girl Tamari snarled at him. How do you? It takes one to know one, Fu interrupted her with a teasing grin. Realization seemed to dawn on the other girl and her breath caught. Naruto and Gaara were still glaring daggers at each other. Shukaku's jinchuriki broke the uncomfortable silence. Why don't you embrace it? It's easy. Nothing can stop you, you kill everyone in your path. And all you do is prove them right, Naruto retorted. Just a stupid, slavering beast to put in chains. The growl left the one-tails jinchuriki. Naruto's eyes flashed red, Fu's wings stretched from her lower back. Chakra pumped through the room, ready to burst. The announcer in the stadium cut them off, announcing the first match. Naruto was meant to fight Neji in minutes. The Hyuga boy had already slipped down the stairs. Finally, they stepped away from each other. Gaara retreated to the back of the room, and Fu moved to the windows. Naruto followed Neji moments later. Everyone else finally let themselves breathe. He was itching for this fight. More than any fight he'd wanted before. Neji had already adopted a standard gentle fist pose, Byakugan activated and at the ready. Naruto stood loose and light on his feet, prepared to move at a moment's notice. He knew Hinata was watching in the stands. Naruto had dropped by the hospital that morning, and Kiba had volunteered to escort her to the match. The nurses had deemed it safe. He'd asked to be sure. The referee lifted his hand. Let the first match of the finals begin. He formed a hand sign and 5 shadow clones spawned, immediately charging Neji. Naruto himself hung back, unsurprised when his foe dispatched the clones easily. He got the feedback from each clone as they were destroyed, a neat trick he'd been unaware of until Jiraiya told him about it. Neji was fast, strong, and accurate. All things Naruto already knew. He needed to push more. 7 clones now, this time mixing in ranged weapons. Several kunai and shuriken were hurled at the older boy, who took it all in stride and dodged them effortlessly. Then the clones rushed him while he was still regaining his posture. He twisted on his heel, and Naruto watched his chakra burst forth from his opponent. Rotation. All the clones were instantly repelled and blown apart. The feedback was useful, a powerful defense that could act as a counter. Nasty thing to run into directly. Neji resumed his previous stance and now went on the offensive, charging Naruto in a blur of speed. 6 more clones spawned and he dove into their ranks to attack alongside them. Time for another experiment. He slapped an explosive tag onto a clone and leapt back as the clone's mass attacked Neji again. He watched the rotation begin and triggered the bomb. The blast wasn't especially powerful when facing the rotation, but it packed enough force to jerk Neji out of it. He staggered backwards, scowling, but unharmed for the most part. Perhaps a bit rattled. Well, there went that idea. Neji watched him cautiously. You're crafty, I'll give you that. But you can't overwhelm me. I know how to counter all of these tactics already. It's a good thing I just opened my bag of tricks, then, Naruto grinned nastily. Time to try something with more firepower, he decided. He clapped his hands together as he amassed the chakra necessary for his next attack. Hailed Beast Art. Foxfire Jutsu. A spectral fox formed out of flames at his feet, bounding around him in a circle before leaping at Neji. As expected, the boy began to twist for a rotation. Unfortunately for him, there was more. His hands flew through the necessary signs as he sucked in a deep breath. Wind style. Air bullet. The blast of wind flew into the spectral fox as it charged and gave it an immense boost in size and speed. The fox, once only the same height as Naruto himself, surged into a monster the size of an elephant. Neji committed to the rotation, but Naruto wasn't playing the game he was expecting. The gigantic fiery fox leapt and ran circles around the enemy, causing the temperature to spike abruptly. Inside the vortex, there was only the heat. It was a trap, not an attack. Naruto spat another air bullet to make the inferno even bigger before he backed off a bit, trying to gauge the effect of his jutsu. Maintaining the foxfire expended a fair bit of chakra without him tapping into Kurama's reserves. He made a sign with his fingers, and the spectral beast howled, lunging downward to clamp its jaws around Neji's defensive position. He took a few deep breaths to recover, but he was certainly in better shape than Neji. The older boy was singed, sweating and shaking from the inferno that trapped him. He looked furious and frustrated, causing Naruto to sneer. Neji clearly hadn't been expecting the fire element techniques from him. He hadn't shown them up until now, after all. Still, Naruto was leery about getting too close. He didn't know Neji's limits, but Lee had sung him praises up and down, touting the Hyuga boy as a genius. It was impossible to forget how badly hurt Hinata had been in the aftermath of their match. Gentle Fist was dangerous, and he had no idea how to safely counter it with Taijutsu. What to do? He made a sign and summoned 7 more shadow clones to attack. Time to see how Neji was really doing after that assault. Neji didn't use rotation this time, instead opting for his gentle fist arts. He managed to take the clones down, but he was visibly slower than before. And yet none of the clones landed a hit. Neji's taijutsu was deadly and efficient, not a single movement wasted. Slick bastard, Naruto muttered. He could see the Byakugan was still going strong. An idea struck him. He made 3 more clones and they all scattered, hurling smoke bombs as Neji. Unfortunately, he was obviously fed up with being on the defensive and started to rush them, dancing around the bombs in pursuit of Naruto. He was slower, but Naruto couldn't outpace him. The speed difference was tight enough that he was able to drag things out for a while longer as he bombarded the field with smoke. Neji caught 2 clones before he locked onto the original. Naruto scowled. More smoke as he retreated. His eyes stung. Finally, the bastard was forced to blink and his eyes squeezed shut from pain. The strain of using the Byakugan for so long on top of all the smoke must have been excruciating. Now, Naruto created a dozen clones in an instant and they lunged at Neji as he tried to regroup. He was still a highly experienced Taijutsu expert, batting away and cutting down several clones in a matter of moments. Naruto jumped back again, summing up some of his remaining chakra reserves, and spat. Another air bullet blew the mob fight apart, sending Neji flying in the opposite direction. Two of his clones bit the dust, but it was the first big hit he'd scored. He pressed his advantage. More smoke bombs to fuck with Neji's eyes. No more Byakugan would make Naruto happier. His remaining clones were finally starting to do a little damage while Neji recovered from the air bullet. They landed a few good hits before his opponent destroyed them, visibly exhausted by the effort of fighting so many foes for so long. Naruto backed off further into the trees after summoning a few more clones. Without the Byakugan to track him, he could actually hide for a moment and come up with a rough plan to finish Neji off. He had a little chakra left, though it was less than he'd have preferred. He was hoping to get through this without having to rely on Kurama's power, but the bastard had lasted longer than Naruto was entirely happy about. "Just do it," Kurama growled in his mind. "You'll have time to rest and infuse chakra afterwards. You'll need my power to take on Shukaku anyway. Finish him. I know you're starving to put him down." The fox was right on all accounts. Naruto reached for the crimson power and Kurama answered, giving him enough juice to finish the battle. The boy left his sanctuary and went on the offensive once again. Foxfire Jutsu. The blazing fox lunged at Neji, smaller and faster than the first one, and dove into the fray amidst the clones. Neji focused on it quickly, dancing through the surviving clones to avoid the fox's attacks. He was herded close to the original and took notice of that fact. With a twist of his feet, he managed to escape the clones and lunged for his true foe. His hand struck the chakra point above the heart and his target was destroyed. Neji froze in shock for a moment, whipping around halfway before a fist drilled into his jaw. Naruto had snuck into the fray while the fox was wreaking havoc and left a decoy behind as bait. He wanted to bloody this guy up with his own two hands. No clone could give him that satisfaction. Now he channeled his jutsu into one last burst. The fox lunged, slashing and biting with its fiery claws and teeth, and exploded once it had Neji in its grasp. His enemy let out a cry of pain, but Naruto dove in, disregarding the last embers still in the air, and crushed Neji's face with one final punch. He felt bones giving way, warm blood bursting upon his knuckles. The older genin hit the ground heavily, tried to rise, and collapsed. Naruto staggered back, panting. He'd give it to Neji, the bastard had some insane skill holding off against his onslaught for so damn long. It had really come down to Naruto more or less outlasting him. Neji was burnt and beaten, and though he struggled, he could not rise. His wounds were too severe. The proctor looked surprised, but did not sound like it when he called the match. Winner. Naruto Uzumaki. He heard some cheers and clapping, but didn't really care for them much until Fu somehow yelled above the whole crowd. "Hell yeah, Naruto." That brought a quick smirk to his lips, but it dropped as he stumbled towards Neji and crouched down. He sat on his heels, glaring down at the other boy. Neji's bloodied face displayed his disbelief at the loss. "Don't fucking touch her again," Naruto hissed. With his message received, Naruto stood and made his way off the field. Medics came in to get Neji out on a stretcher, but Naruto paid them no mind. He had to focus on other things, Gaara, most prominently. Kurama flooded his body with chakra and that warm healing energy. Naruto's breath settled before he'd even made his way back inside. Sasuke's match, after he finally showed up, that is, saw everything go to hell. Fu had won her match against some sound ninja Naruto didn't give a damn about. When Sasuke showed up and started fighting Gaara, he had to begrudgingly admit the Uchiha boy was doing a decent job. Kakashi hadn't been wasting his time. Gaara was even hurt, but had cocooned himself into a sphere of sand. Kurama's attention sharpened. "He's going to change into Shukaku," the fox hissed, tails lashing. "Right here." Naruto froze. Some sound was in the air, lulling him. Kurama jabbed him with a spike of chakra. "Focus. Someone is using Jinjutsu." Fu, but the girl had also been snapped out of it, presumably with Chime's assistance. She cast a glance at him, both confirming the other was in decent shape, and then an army of sand and sound ninja moved in on the village and stadium. Battle was joined all over the place. Sasuke was still in the arena, though Kakashi had joined him. They were trying to get past a Jonin to reach Gaara's cocoon. Naruto and Fu made to join them when Gaara's teammates got in the way. He reached for Kurama's power, and the fox funneled as much as he could at once. "That lost." Naruto roared, blasting them with an air bullet that tore part of the building apart. He and Fu seized the chance to escape and made a beeline for Gaara. Kurama yanked all of their minds briefly together. "We will tear the sand open," the fox decided. "Get him with a Jinjutsu." "Chime, we're on it," chittered the Seven Tails. Fu's wings snapped open from her lower back and she blitzed towards the cocoon, spitting a curtain of glittering scales all around Gaara's position. His allies were forced to retreat. Naruto created dozens of clones in an instant that engaged and forced the enemy ninja further away. Kurama's chakra spilled into him again as he began blasting the sand cocoon with everything he had. It was a tight defense, heavily compacted and strong. Gaara hadn't had enough time to fully change, but the beating he was taking, in conjecture with Kurama and Chime's proximity, was enough for him to emerge early. He was covered in sand that had changed parts of his body to resemble Shukaku's form. A massive clawed hand slashed at Naruto, but he dove away. As the cocoon fell away, only his legs remained human. Even his eyes had changed to gold, star-shaped pupils. The beast that was Gaara roared and lunged at them. "I'll kill you." "He's losing control," Kurama snarled. Naruto avoided the charge, but before Gaara could even slam into the ground, a thread of silk wrapped around his newly formed tail and dragged him into the air. Fu yanked him upwards with all her strength. "Okay buddy, let's get you out of the village." Fu shouted, hurling Gaara skyward towards the village outskirts. She got some impressive distance, the girl was a lot stronger than she looked, especially with Chime backing her up. "Naruto." She reached out a hand and he leapt for her. She caught him and spun in the air, throwing him after Gaara before giving chase. Gaara had righted himself, preparing to land, but he hadn't seen Naruto being thrown after him. The boy's hands flashed through signs. Air bullet. The impact slammed into Gaara's back and drove him even further away, clean into the forest where he crashed into the trees with a thunderous impact. Fu swept over him, scattering scales that gleamed until they were blinding. Kurama juiced him up again, and Naruto spat several more air bullets, pummeling Gaara with one shot after another. He was preparing to unleash a foxfire jutsu when Kurama roared a warning. "He's changing." Smoke exploded outwards from Gaara's position, a mountain's worth that blew Naruto and Fu skyward. The girl managed to catch him, but the damage was done. Shukaku towered over them in all his terrible glory. Kurama snapped orders to them immediately. "Do not let him fall asleep. Our best chance is while the jinchuriki is still in control." Fu launched them skyward with a burst of power from Chime, racing towards Gaara's shape with blistering speed. She saw his eyes start closing and fired a blast of scales at their foe. "Oh no, you don't." Tailed beast art. Blinding scales. The light from the scales was concentrated this time and searing. Gaara howled in pain. Fu threw Naruto at him. He landed on Shukaku's skull, Kurama's power flaring into a red cloak around him to fight off the sand that immediately tried to grasp his body. Naruto lunged, creating clone after clone after clone to assault Gaara's position. The sand rose in defense. Fu danced through the air around them, whipping at Gaara with threads of silk that wrapped into the sand to clump it together. Nets and webs were formed to help however she could. The Shukaku body was moving slowly, its host harried and not fully controlling it. A massive arm swept towards Fu as if she were a fly, but she danced around it with mocking ease. Gaara roared in fury and directed waves of sand after her. His defenses dropped for just a moment. It was enough. 6 of Naruto's clones dove in, attacking with everything they had and yanking on the sand-soaked nets Fu had created, pulling away at Gaara's defenses. A gap opened. Foxfire jutsu. The fiery beast shot down like a bolt of red lightning and clamped onto Gaara's flesh from behind, searing his arm and shoulder until he was screaming in pain. The sand rose again to smother the flames. It left his face open. Kurama pumped him full of as much power as he could squeeze through the seal, and Naruto delivered a savage blow to Gaara's jaw. The impact sent his eyes rolling. While he was stunned, Fu shot another silken thread down to wrap around Gaara's torso. With a mighty heave, she pulled him free of Shukaku's body. "I got you." Without the host, the sand-formed behemoth fell apart. Gaara was still stunned by the blow and sudden separation from the beast he'd just been linked to. Fu brought him down to ground level and he collapsed. Shukaku's jinchuriki groaned, trying to regain control of himself. As he pushed himself to his feet, Naruto tackled him and drove him onto his back. Another punch struck him in the temple. "Are you done?" Naruto snarled. "He's dangerous, Naruto. The seal is too weak. He'll just transform again in a moment. You'll have to kill him." "No." Fu protested. "He's okay, yeah, he's really messed up, but he's still one of us." "Maybe. Don't be naive, girl." Kurama rebuked, though Chime made an offended noise in their minds. "Sympathy won't change that he is your enemy. He will get up again and again until I don't give a damn." Naruto grabbed Gaara's collar and yanked the other boy up until they were nose to nose with each other. "What are we even doing? Are we seriously just going to beat each other to death? Are we just weapons like the villages want us to be? We're killing each other for nothing." Gaara was half stunned, still unable to speak as he stared in the face of Naruto's impassioned spiel. Fu shifted on her feet uneasily, not sure what to do. "We're tools to them," Naruto growled. His eyes were red as Kurama's. "All 6 of us. We're all the same, so why are we fighting each other?" Kurama was silent for a moment, surprised by the vehemence in his host's voice. He considered something, then sighed and dragged them all into the tailed beast mindscape. A young jinchuriki stood before each of their beasts. Kurama and Chimei were beside each other, Shukaku faced them opposite. The tanuki eyed Naruto with a mix of disdain and confusion. "You're a weird human. And you're a massive pain in my ass," Naruto snarked, adjusting to the sudden change in scenery faster for his anger. Fu was staring around her with wide curious eyes. Gaara just looked shell-shocked. He had taken a hell of a punch. "Enough," Kurama growled. He gauged Naruto for a few moments before finally making a decision. Damn the boy, but he had a point. They were really just wasting themselves, fighting each other like this. And he saw a possibility for freedom he'd not considered before. "Naruto is right," he finally said. "We shouldn't be fighting." "That's rich, coming from you," Shukaku accused. "All high and mighty as you are. He's not the one putting chains on you, though," Chimei pointed out. The tanuki hesitated. "No, I guess not." Gaara was still frozen, seemingly unsure if he should speak. Shukaku eyed his jinchuriki disdainfully. Kurama caught his thoughts and cut the other beast off. "Don't try to kill him. It's irritating, but the jinchuriki might just be our best chance for freedom. They're not so easily tracked. The hidden villages have learned well how to trap and capture us." "Why are you right?" "I hate it when you're right," Shukaku complained. Kurama just sneered back. Chimei intervened before things could get ugly. "So, what do we do?" Kurama pondered the question for a moment before he answered. "We're strongest as a group. We could leave together. Try to find the rest of our brethren, disappear where the villages cannot find us." It was an idea none of the beasts had ever considered for how widespread they were. But this was no longer a time where they were free to do as they pleased. Much had changed since they'd been split from their progenitor. "You're serious, aren't you?" Shukaku sounded incredulous. "Do I look like I'm joking?" Kurama grunted. "I've tried to escape from two jinchuriki before. Even I can't break free on my own. What choice do we have? We can be weapons, or we can be free." Naruto was watching him curiously, though he seemed pleased that they were in agreement. The boy thought more like Kurama than the fox had anticipated. "I practically raised him," the fox realized in a second. "Of course he's like me." "Fu? What do you think?" Chimei asked. I love the hidden waterfall village," she admitted, frowning. "But I'm lucky my village loves me. The other jinchuriki haven't been so lucky, have they? If we can help them and their tailed beasts, shouldn't we?" Kurama nodded slightly and glanced at the only person who hadn't spoken since they arrived in the mindscape. Gaara. The boy stared at the giant fox, glanced at the tanuki, and then the beetle in turn. He didn't seem to have an answer. Shukaku finally rumbled. "The assassins might stop coming after you if we leave." "Assassins?" Fu gaped. "What? His father tries to kill him regularly. Trying to find a more stable host for me, I think." Naruto's jaw dropped. Even Kurama's tail stilled for a moment. Gaara looked even more tired than before at the mention of his would-be killers. Or perhaps the exhaustion came from the mention of his father. "I don't know. I'm just so tired." Kurama lifted his eyes to Shukaku. The beast said nothing, but it was Naruto who finally approached the other boy and set a hand on his shoulder. "Leave with us," he said. "We'll plan it out, the six of us. We'll find a new home. Somewhere they'll never find us." Gaara looked down at Naruto's hand, frowning. He glanced at Fu, who offered him a hesitant but cheerful smile. "Okay." Naruto laid a flower before the picture of Hiruzen Sarutobi in silence. The village was mourning the lives lost in the brief war against the Sand and Sound villages, including the third Hokage. He'd been slain battling Orochimaru. Kurama couldn't say he was surprised. The old monkey had been a student of the first and second Hokages, well beyond his years as a fighter. Though he'd been deadly enough still to cast the Reaper Death Seal and cripple Orochimaru. That was useful. Gaara and Fu had headed back to their respective villages for now. The three of them had agreed to take some time to recover and prepare for their escape. A plan like theirs needed to be carefully calculated. They had agreed to meet on the outskirts of the Leaf Village in a few months. While Naruto trained and prepared himself, Kurama devoted his spare time to plotting their escape route. Where they would go. Where they could hide. What they would do afterwards when they got away. If they got away. The fox stirred as he felt Naruto's emotions roil. The boy was staring at the picture of the third Hokage, frowning and confused by something that wasn't quite grief. The old man had given him a place to live. Money to survive. But he'd not done much else. Naruto supposed he couldn't force the villagers to like him, but even so the Hokage had done little for his happiness. He wanted to know why. "He's gone, boy," Kurama rumbled. "It does no good to wonder on questions that can never be answered." Naruto heard him, though he said nothing. He cast one more glance at the third Hokage's picture and left him behind. Kurama really needed to teach Naruto how to use sensory abilities. Assuming, that is, they survived their unexpected guests. The short training trip planned with Jiraiya had quickly turned into a nightmare. They'd only traveled to a small, nearby town when the Uchiha decided to remind them that they were not completely extinct. Naruto opened the door, expecting Jiraiya, and found Itachi Uchiha staring down at him. That Sharingan immediately gave his identity away. The boy froze and Kurama rumbled to life within him, fangs bared. "Hello Naruto," Itachi murmured. "Really? This kid has the nine-tailed fox inside of him." His eyes jerked away from Itachi as a tall figure stepped around the other man. Blue flesh, a giant wrapped weapon at his back. A scratched hit-and-missed forehead protector. Kurama sensed his chakra and knew he was a major threat, to say nothing of the fucking chakra parasite he was carrying with him. He'd seen too many of those in his life. "You will come with us," Itachi said. "Naruto," Kurama growled in his mind. "We need to stall. The Toad Sage should return soon enough." Naruto collected himself as best he could and fired off the first round of ammunition that came to mind. "You killed the Uchiha clan." "I did. Did you get the man who freed the Nine Tails?" That gave Itachi pause, but Kurama sensed the brief flicker of surprise. He knew. He knew the attack was caused by the Uchiha. "He's aware," Kurama told Naruto. "I have no bullshit," Naruto snarled, angry with the attempted lie. Angry with the Sharingan, with the Uchiha, with all of it. "Who killed my mom?" Now Itachi's eyes actually went wide. His partner stared at Naruto, then to the Uchiha with a fascinated expression, though he said nothing. He seemed just as interested. But Itachi regained his cool within moments. "It doesn't matter. Let's go outside." His partner reached for that big damn weapon at his back. "Itachi, it'll be problematic if this kid puts up a struggle. Maybe I should cut a leg off to make sure." Kurama started infusing chakra, something to give them an edge when this inevitably broke out into a fight. They had a chance to escape, but it would depend on if he got the timing right. He was hoping that maybe, just maybe, Itachi would go for a jinjutsu. That would be too messy. He'd scream. Itachi dismissed his partner's idea. "I'll take care of it. Look into his eyes, Naruto," Kurama ordered. "But do it." Naruto trusted him. He looked at the Sharingan. Itachi dragged them into a jinjutsu, and Kurama acted the second he felt the flux. Reverse jinjutsu. Then the three of them were in Kurama's mindscape, having dragged Itachi in and Naruto with him via the Uchiha's own jinjutsu. Itachi was visibly surprised as the massive fox neared down at him. He found himself trapped in a cage similar to Kurama's own prison. The Uchiha blinked at them. "A neat trick. I didn't think your control of the Nine Tails was so advanced." "Answer the question," Kurama snarled. "Did you kill the masked man who enslaved me?" Itachi's eyes narrowed. If he was surprised that Kurama could speak, he didn't comment on it. "I did not. Though he did participate in the destruction of the Uchiha clan." "Who is he?" Naruto demanded, storming up to the cage with fury in his eyes. Kurama, however, knew their position was more delicate than it seemed. He had cast a counter jinjutsu, but the amount of chakra he could slip through the seal wasn't enough to trap someone like Itachi for long. All the Uchiha had to do was flex his power even a little, and the trap would fall apart like a house of cards in a breeze. That he didn't immediately free himself was surprising. "It's Madara Uchiha." "You lie," Kurama spat. "I know Madara's chakra. Better than anyone else. The man who took me from Kushina Uzumaki was not him." Itachi's brow furrowed and the fox pressed him further. "Either you are lying, or you have been lied to. Is he still alive?" "He is." Kurama's jaw clenched. Another fucking Uchiha to deal with. Fantastic. He'd really hoped Itachi had killed the bastard during the massacre. Itachi gauged the fox, then Naruto. "He is part of the same organization as myself, Akatsuki. They are planning on capturing the tailed beasts in the near future." Both of them bristled, but Kurama was the more cautious of the two. "And yet you tell us." The Uchiha said nothing and the fox's curiosity grew. He had had every opportunity to break free of this, frankly weak, jinjutsu. He'd even cooperated with them. "You are not what you seem," Kurama voiced his suspicion. "I am what I have made myself to be." Naruto said nothing, brow furrowed as he glanced from Kurama to Itachi. The fox focused his chakra again, and their guest made a sign with his hands. Their time was up. Even the most beautiful trees have roots surrounded by darkness. "Be wary," Itachi warned, and broke the jinjutsu. They snapped back to reality. Itachi's partner, the other Akatsuki, was holding his weapon's grip, having realized something was off with the jinjutsu casting. Naruto tensed, ready to move. Sasuke arrived, getting their attention as he challenged his elder brother and vowed vengeance. It bought Kurama a few more seconds to do what was necessary. "You're going to cast a new jutsu," he told Naruto. "Are you crazy? If I've never used it, you don't need to do it well. See that weapon the blue one has? It's a chakra parasite. They latch onto tailed beasts and suck the chakra from them for sustenance. But they don't like eating certain flavors of chakra. I've gotten rid of them before. Be ready." Realization dawned on the boy as Kurama channeled the chakra he'd prepared specifically to deal with the damn thing. To cause a distraction to buy more time. All they needed was time. The blue one seemed to recognize that Naruto was trying to pull something and again grasped his weapon. Now, let's not interrupt such a touching reunion, shall we? He shouted in pain as the grip of his weapon suddenly burst with spikes, slicing into his flesh. The living sword flailed and writhed, hurling itself along the ground in an effort to get away from the negative chakra Kurama pushed into his host. Naruto slapped his hands together. Tailed beast art. Bitter spirit. A pale shadow burst out of flames and gave chase to the parasitic sword. Its stunned master watched the blade scramble past Sasuke, who was so focused on Itachi that he barely noticed. Kurama almost snorted at the mockery of his power Naruto had cast. It was meant to be a fox, but as it stood, it was little more than a tiny pale will-o'-the-wisp. But it was his first attempt and it did the job. Sasuke charged Itachi with Chidori as Naruto flew through hand signs. Foxfire Jutsu. The blue-skinned Akatsuki scowled, recovering from his surprise, and leapt back as the fiery creature roared to life and charged. Naruto was already making another move. Sasuke, get out of the way. He sucked in a breath and spat at the foxfire. Air bullet. In the tight space of the hallway, the enhanced inferno consumed everything. But the Akatsuki wasn't helpless. His hands flashed through his own symbols, and a water-style jutsu formed a wall to guard against the flames. A blast of steam filled the hall, and Naruto started to retreat only for the walls, floor, and ceiling to be enveloped in flesh. He heard Sasuke screaming, but didn't dive into attack. Not when he couldn't see a damn thing. Kurama felt Jiraiya's chakras surge and relax somewhat. The old toad is here. The steam cleared after almost a minute, during which time they heard the sounds of fighting, a tremendous crash, and then silence. Naruto shifted uneasily, but Kurama calmed him. He could sense the two Akatsuki fleeing. Jiraiya was with an unconscious Sasuke. That had been a little too exciting, but the encounter had held quite a bit of value, Kurama thought. I am teaching you sensory skills starting today, Kurama told the boy. Naruto just nodded as he approached Jiraiya and his wounded teammate. Kurama demanded a meeting with Jiraiya the day they left the Leaf Village to find Tsunade. The old toad was surprised but accepted the invitation when Naruto passed it on. Now the Sannin stood before Kurama's cage with Naruto in the boy's mindscape, observing the seal with fascination. I see Minato did his job well, Jiraiya commented. Kurama sneered at him. He learned enough of the Uzumaki clan sealing jutsu to be a nuisance, I'll grant him that, the fox said grudgingly. Jiraiya hummed and crossed his arms. So, what did you want to talk about? Kurama told him what Itachi had passed on. Naruto had asked him about it, the boy had realized something wasn't quite right with their encounter. The fox had watched enough top-secret information exchanges from within his other jinchuriki to know when someone was trying to hand over a message discreetly. Jiraiya's brow furrowed instantly when they mentioned the roots in the darkness. Danzo, huh? Danzo? Naruto frowned with him. An old ally of the third Hokage, Kurama rumbled, recalling the man with no small amount of suspicion. He works in the shadows of the leaf. If I remember right, he was in charge of a special sect of Anbu Black Ops. Jiraiya nodded, though he said nothing. I'll do some digging, but Root was shut down after the Uchiha massacre. For Itachi to mention him in such a way interesting. The message had been passed on. Kurama would leave that to the Sannin for now, ponder it himself another time. But he had another request. Teach Naruto the skills Minato possessed, the fox ordered. Now an eyebrow rose on Jiraiya's face. Oh, do not be coy, Kurama growled. You taught the boy's father, you and I both know you have extensive knowledge of the Uzumaki sealing jutsus. If this Akatsuki group means to capture us, he will need such skills. Naruto listened in silence, brimming with curiosity. Though he already knew Minato Namikaze was his father, he knew little of the man's prowess and, rather impressive, jutsu mastery. Those aren't easy abilities to teach to a jonin, let alone a genin, Jiraiya warned, though he didn't refuse the idea. They certainly weren't, but they were necessary nonetheless. They needed Naruto to learn those skills, they needed the yellow flash come again. A foe so powerful and dangerous that the enemy would sooner flee on sight than face him. Frankly, all of the jinchuriki needed that kind of reputation if they wanted to find any sort of peace after fleeing the villages. I think you will find Naruto is up to the task, Kurama replied. The boy beamed at his certainty. The old toad seemed somewhat amused by that. Very well. They started with Rasengan. Kurama resisted the urge to snort when Jiraiya told Naruto what they were going to learn. Sealing jutsus would be practiced during resting times, but his chakra control would be practiced and refined with mastery of Minato's. Borrowed, Kurama told Naruto that first night he tried the Rasengan. He borrowed it from the tailed beasts. What? Minato encountered the 4 and 5 tails jinchuriki during wartime, Kurama explained. He faced our strongest attacks, the tailed beast bomb, and based his development of the Rasengan on that. The boy was fascinated by the idea. Kurama recalled first seeing the technique from within Kushina. He was going to give it some needlessly long-winded name, as he always did. Your mother named it Rasengan. Minato created it to keep her safe. Naruto's eyes flashed with longing. Can you help me learn it? Of course, Kurama snickered. So they began. The boy had a lot on his plate as they traveled. If he wasn't practicing Rasengan or Jiraiya's sealing jutsus, Kurama was dragging him into the mindscape to learn some of his own techniques. The knowledge of Akatsuki preparing to hunt the tailed beasts had made both of them agitated. It was pertinent that they be aptly prepared. To continue his training to master Kurama's abilities and to ensure they stood a better chance against the Akatsuki next time, Jiraiya had loosened the 8 trigram seal, not much, but enough to get a decent amount of power through. It would take time for Naruto to get used to wielding that much chakra, though. Such power was overwhelming with his current skills. But Naruto had never been a quitter and he never would be. He pushed himself to his limits, devoted every waking second to his training, and was met with success before long. Jiraiya had only demonstrated the Rasengan a few times, but Kurama was intimately familiar with the technique in ways even the old toad wasn't. The boy was dedicated and had learned from Kurama many times. And given that Rasengan was a jutsu personal to his family, well, it only fueled his drive. Naruto had it down in a week. Kurama couldn't help but laugh at Jiraiya's face when the old toad woke up one morning to find Naruto standing there with a Rasengan in his hand. The boy had bags under his eyes, mentally and physically strained, but there was victory surging through his blood that made it all worth it. Tsunade was a headache to deal with, as was common with Hashirama's family. Damned Senju. Kurama didn't focus on her much, she possessed incredible physical strength, sure, but her healing techniques were pale shadows of her grandfather's. He sensed her briefly before dismissing the woman to focus on his own thoughts. Naruto didn't particularly care, either. She was to be Hokage for a village he intended to leave soon enough. But of course, it wouldn't be a trip if all 3 Sannin didn't show up at some point. Orochimaru wanted the woman to heal his arms. Kurama sneered at the naive idea, as if the Reaper Death Seal could be so easily undone. Unfortunately, they were on more even terms since Tsunade had stupidly drugged Jiraiya. Orochimaru engaged the old toad in battle, while his assistant fought the rest of them. Well, fought might be too strong a word. He was arrogant and too sure of himself, too certain that Naruto was an inexperienced genin. They summoned a pair of giant snakes, and battle was joined. One of them managed to catch Naruto in its jaws when the boy was leaping away from debris. He was already pissed. Kurama was in the same boat. "Fuck this," Naruto snarled. "Fire style." Burst breath. The snake screamed in agony as the inferno raced down its gullet and cooked it from the inside out. Naruto leapt from its open jaws and climbed atop its head. He spotted Kabuto engaging Tsunade and Shizune. Kurama was feeding him chakra non-stop. "We'll drag him into a jinjutsu. I'm not good at your jinjutsu yet. I'll do it. Kill him when the opportunity arises. Do not hesitate. His chakra is a match for Kakashi's." Naruto created a storm of shadow clones and charged the man. Most of his clones were outright destroyed by the skilled fighter. His precision medical ninjutsu was similar to a gentle fist art in some ways. He drove Kabuto into a trap, letting the man believe he was relying on sheer numbers out of desperation. The arrogant smirk said it all, he was confident he could best the boy. But Naruto was as crafty as the fox who taught him, and he was a ninja. Ninja were killers. The pair of hands shot from underground and snatched his ankles. Another clone Naruto had prepared before they'd engaged him, set to lie in wait. Now stuck, the rest of his clones leapt onto Kabuto. He beat a few back with some admittedly impressive taijutsu, but he showed an opening eventually. Naruto got up close, and Kurama snapped a jinjutsu on Kabuto immediately. It wasn't a refined jinjutsu, but Kurama's presence leaching into the man was enough to make him freeze for a few valuable seconds. He snatched Kabuto in his claws, teeth bared in a mockery of a grin, as their enemy struggled to break free. Kabuto did get loose, but not fast enough. He snapped himself back to consciousness as a Rasengan drilled into his face. His clones helped drag Kabuto down as the Rasengan ripped and tore away the flesh, bones, and brains. The final impact of slamming the man's skull into the blood-soaked dirt was telling. Kabuto's face was a twisted, cratered mess. Kurama sensed around, but no substitution or clone had been created. Their ploy had worked. Now for the snake. Orochimaru seemed to realize he was in far more danger with his assistant now dead. Naruto wasn't a match for him, but Jiraiya seized the opportunity to drive him off. The crippled Sannin had no jutsu that could match his rival, even if Tsunade wasn't participating yet. Wisely, the snake fled. Kurama considered it a pity Jiraiya hadn't killed him, but he blamed Tsunade's drugs for that. In the end, Naruto was the least banged up of the group, even discounting Kurama's healing. That fact amused him to no end. Tsunade spoke to him later that evening. Naruto was eating when she sat down beside him with a bottle of sake in her hand. Kurama snorted in the boy's mind, she'd retained all of her grandfather's bad habits. "That was impressive today," she told him. "Only a few ninja have mastered the Rasengan." "My dad picked it up from the tailed beasts," Naruto replied, taking another bite. "And I had a great teacher." Tsunade's lips twitched, though she didn't look at him directly. Yes, Jiraiya does have a talent for teaching. She'd never known Naruto meant Kurama, though the Toad Sage had been the one to put him on that path. But Kurama knew, a flicker of warmth filled him at the boy's meaning. He's teaching you all of Minato's jutsu. MMHM. Which reminds me, Jiraiya suddenly approached them from behind. Naruto looked over his shoulder, a spoonful of soup half raised to his mouth. I think you've earned this. The old toad handed him a unique kunai that Kurama recognized immediately. One of Minato's old blades. Naruto took it as Jiraiya explained its significance. You're not quite ready to really use the Flying Thunder God jutsu, but I think you'll get there sooner than later. It's useful if you need to make a quick getaway. I wouldn't try it in battle until you're more experienced. Teleportation is tricky at best and fatal at worst, but it was a keepsake of Minato that was important to Naruto. He had Kushina's old scarf, but nothing of his father to remember him by. The kunai filled that hole just a little. Thanks. Tsunade agreed to become the Hokage in the end. They returned to the village so she could heal those injured from the short war, including Kakashi and Sasuke, both incapacitated by Itachi, and Naruto continued to study jutsu. Kurama refined their plans to leave, not long now. Naruto had managed to get a hold of old Uzumaki scrolls at the village library. The ninja in charge had asked him why and on what authority he was making such demands. The boy had offered him a sneer and reminded the idiot that he was the last of the Uzumaki clan. Authority? That knowledge was his right. The Dumbus ended up taking it to the Hokage, and Tsunade reprimanded him on the spot, allowing Naruto to take the Uzumaki scrolls for his study. Legally, they were all his anyway. There was a lot to learn, but it was all there, in almost 24 scrolls containing generations of knowledge from his dead clan. Most of it was information on the feared Uzumaki sealing jutsus. Useful tools to say the least, Kurama reflected. They'd be valuable for many things. He learned to make the seals for the Flying Thunder God jutsu and knew, in theory, how to execute it. He prepared one of the seals at his home in case he ever needed to warp there. Naruto was holed up in his apartment or practicing on the training grounds for the weeks following, but even then he left clones at home to keep working on sealing jutsu. He encountered a few of his fellow genin during that time, though he didn't spend too much time with them. Jiraiya was off on another mission, while Tsunade focused on getting the village under her control. Sakura managed to drag him to the hospital one day to check on Kakashi, who'd abandoned his bed by the time they got there, and Sasuke. The Uchiha boy wanted to fight. His eyes were intense, Kurama could sense his roiling emotions and sneered into Naruto's thoughts. He's jealous. Weak and insecure in his own strength. Naruto eyed the Uchiha for a few seconds before he refused. He had better things to do than beat some brat still in a hospital bed. Sasuke didn't take no for an answer. He threw a glass of water at Naruto and it shattered against his back, soaking his clothes. Though the broken shards didn't pierce his flesh, it still hurt. Naruto slowly looked over his shoulder at the fuming Uchiha child. Anger boiled in his gut. Really? Why won't you fight me? I never took you for a coward, Sasuke accused. Fuck yourself. Naruto grabbed the three-pronged kunai in a moment of anger and channeled his chakra into the seal. Kurama barely registered what he was doing before the boy teleported to the marking in his apartment and immediately collapsed, gasping. The shadow clones he'd left there popped out of existence. That was foolish, he berated Naruto. The child was exhausted, unused to spending so much chakra in one go. You can't just use teleportation on a whim. You aren't skilled enough yet to use such tremendous amounts of chakra. I needed to try it sometime, he groaned. Not from halfway across the village in a fit of temper. Kurama reprimanded, tails lashing. You have to be smarter than that. Naruto was probably angry enough to retort, but the exhaustion outweighed his emotion. Kurama's lips lowered to hide his fangs. Well. You pulled it off. That's enough for now. You'll know what to expect next time. Aha, Naruto curled up on the floor, still holding the kunai, and passed out. Kurama just sighed, feeding his chakra into the child to help him recuperate. Naruto rested most of that day once he woke up, though he practiced sealing jutsu in his apartment in the meantime. Nothing impressive, just containing and releasing simple things, tools and weapons and the like. But it was practice that would build into greater things. They were just days away from leaving to join Gaara and Fu. There was something the boy wanted to do before that. Kurama wasn't sure, but he knew Naruto wouldn't be able to really leave if he didn't try. He managed to track down Hinata the day before they left. She was helping Ino do some work at the flower shop. Though her body had recovered, she was still technically on rest to ensure she'd fully healed. Naruto dropped in and talked to them for a short time before Ino sent them to the back room with a smile and a wink that made Hinata blush furiously. Kurama felt a vague pulse of amusement. Adolescent humans. Silly things. Hinata had begun to work on watering a few flowers that had clearly seen better days. Naruto cocked his head at the wilting petals. Those don't look too good. Ino's family hasn't been able to spend quite as much time on them as usual, Hinata explained, frowning. A lot of people have been coming to buy flowers since the war, but there's rebuilding that needs to be done, and missions to complete. Her mother has been working overtime, even with Ino here. Naruto walked over to stand beside her, gently touching the wilting plant. He closed his eyes, and Kurama allowed a sliver of chakra to slip through. The flowers shivered, grew brighter and flourished in seconds. Hinata was stunned. How? Now he shifted uncomfortably. My chakra, well, what I used wasn't my chakra exactly. The nine tails. A soft murmur caught Naruto off guard. Hinata didn't look wary so much as curious. He nodded hesitantly. Is that okay? She nodded back, a faint smile forming on her lips. It's okay. You used that to heal me, didn't you? Yes. Thank you. She looked back to the blooming flowers, shaking her head slightly. I didn't know the nine tails could do that. Everyone's so afraid of it. His name is Kurama, Naruto said quietly. She was startled. I didn't know it. He had a name. He keeps it secret. He looked at her meaningfully. Hinata dipped her head. I won't tell anyone. It was quiet between them for a few moments. Then Hinata spoke again. Can he hear me? Yes. Thank you for helping me out, Kurama. The fox twitched within Naruto, not expecting such a direct referral from the shy, soft-spoken child. He didn't give a reply to Naruto for her, but something like approval radiated from his prison. He says you're welcome. Naruto cracked a slight smile. Hinata seemed happy with that. They got to talking for a while as Hinata continued watering flowers, with Naruto occasionally giving little bits of Kurama's chakra to the plants that were really struggling. He asked about how she'd been doing since the short war between the villages. He'd found out not long after parting ways with Gaara and Fu that Hinata had been subject to an attempted kidnapping. Though she'd been retrieved unharmed, it had infuriated Naruto, and only the knowledge that her would-be kidnappers were dead calmed him. I should have been there, he scowled. It was chaos, she reminded him softly. You had your own battle to fight. You couldn't have known. Naruto was still troubled by the notion that someone had taken her from right under his nose. Kurama quietly rebuked him. You cannot lock her up and keep her safe from the world like a treasure, boy. She is part of a powerful clan and a ninja. Danger will always be in her life, just as it is in yours. He knew the fox was right, but Kurama could sense the answer didn't make him happy. He'd have to come to terms with it eventually. Hinata had been doing well since the exams, though. She was slowly reintegrating herself into her family. Her father was trying to repair the damage he'd done to their relationship and had seen the error of his ways. She was talking with her little sister again. Neji was being trained by her father, too. All in all, it seemed the Hyuga clan was finally mending the broken bridges in their family. Hinata wasn't the heir and that was fine with her. She told Naruto she didn't really want to be. Hanabi was better suited to that role, stronger and sterner despite her younger age. She sounded happy. Naruto was glad to hear she was doing well. What about you? I heard you ran into Itachi Uchiha with Sasuke, she frowned worriedly. Naruto took a breath. I came out of that fine. Kurama protected me from Itachi's genjutsu, he murmured. Naruto hesitated and Kurama quietly encouraged him. If he was going to do this, he needed to stop putting it off. Time was running out. Itachi is part of an organization, he told Hinata in a hushed voice. She stepped a little closer to listen, expression serious. They're going to start hunting jinchuriki soon. Like you, she whispered. Fear for him gleamed in her eyes. Naruto swallowed and met her gaze. She was the only person he'd ever fully trusted besides Kurama, and now he had to. I can't stay here, Hinata, he finally said. I can't stay in the village. There are others like me out there, they'll be in danger. 2 of them were at the Chunin exams. She figured it out while he was struggling for words. You're leaving. I have to. It's not just me and them, there are more jinchuriki. Some of them are just weapons for the villages, they deserve better than that. And with the Akatsuki hunting us. She shook her head and raised her hand, laying her fingers over his mouth with a ghost of a touch. Naruto froze, heart racing and afraid she might turn on him then and there. I know how badly the village treated you, she whispered. There were tears forming in her eyes and something in his heart clenched painfully. How some of them still treat you. And now these people hunting you, what do they want? They want the tailed beasts. To steal them from the jinchuriki, Naruto took a shaky breath. My mom was the 9 tails jinchuriki before me. Someone took Kurama from her, set him loose on the village under a jinjutsu. The guy who did it, he's one of them. He's in the Akatsuki. They'll kill you, won't they? Yeah. There was silence between them for a few moments. Hinata finally took a long deep breath. Will you ever come back? I don't know. I don't think so. If I run off with the other jinchuriki, I'm sure they won't just let me leave. The Leaf will send someone after me. They want Kurama under their control just as much as the Akatsuki. He's nothing but a weapon to them. Hinata reached for his hand in a moment of daring and squeezed tight. He squeezed back. If the other jinchuriki are like you, then they're people, not weapons. They deserve better than that. You deserve better than that. You have such a big heart and nobody cares to see it. She finally looked up at him with tears streaming down her face, but there was a wobbly upward curve to her lips. "Promise to be careful." "I promise," Naruto struggled to get the words out. He yanked her close by her hand, hugged her as he'd never hugged anyone before. She was nestled against him, squeezing with all she had, and he was hurting, but those short minutes were a relief. She hadn't condemned him. "I'm gonna miss you," he told her. "A lot." "I'll miss you, too," her breath whispered into his ear. "Kurama, take care of each other." The fox dragged her into his mindscape for a brief moment, unable to help himself. He stared down at the girl, who watched him with wide, shocked eyes. Kurama studied her closely, studied the child that had defied the vast majority of his expectations for so long. Even now, knowing what she knew, he could not sense any sort of cruelty or negativity towards Naruto or himself. "You have a good heart, Byakugan princess," Kurama sighed, perhaps more softly than he'd ever spoken. "Be well." And they parted. They left in the night. Naruto had everything prepared. Supplies, weapons, all the Uzumaki sealing scrolls he'd stored. He'd had it all ready to go at a moment's notice for days. The last items he put into a sealing scroll for safekeeping were his mom's scarf and his dad's kunai. Now he slipped out of the village in the early morning, well before the sun came up. Nobody saw him leave. He traveled to the village outskirts, past the first town several miles out, and waited in the woods at the agreed meeting place. Naruto sat down amidst the trees and closed his eyes, feeling with Kurama. It was about an hour later that they sensed Jiraiya and Fu. Shortly afterwards, Shukaku and Gaara were close enough to feel as well. Fu got there first, faster with her wings. They reunited quietly, both of them tense, until Gaara finally joined them. He looked a lot better than Naruto remembered, though he still had dark lines around his eyes. He seemed to have gotten some actual sleep. His chakra didn't feel nearly as agitated. Clearly, Shukaku had given him a break. The three jinchuriki sat together and joined their beasts in the shared mindscape. "So we're really doing this?" Chimay was shivering with excitement. "I hope so." "We did come all this way," Shukaku rumbled. Fu glanced at the other beasts. "Where are we going?" "The village hidden in the whirlpools," Kurama declared. "The ancestral home of Clan Uzumaki. It's on an island off the coast of the Land of Fire." "It's a ruin," Chimay said bluntly. "The Land of Lightning and the Land of Water destroyed it because they feared their sealing jutsu so much. All the bridges and safe crossings were destroyed. And our enemies won't expect us to hide in a dead land. It's close enough to the disputed islands, unclaimed by any of the hidden villages. Between the wreckage, whirlpools, and territorial uncertainties, it's enough to serve as a home base." Shukaku pondered the idea for a moment. Sounds fine to me. There are a bunch of islands there, right? We can make several bases. Naruto has a number of sealing jutsu scrolls from Clan Uzumaki and has begun to learn basic teleportation jutsu," Kurama added. "With our chakra reserves, we can set up bunkers and traps to make quick escapes should it be necessary." "Good idea," Chimay praised. "I didn't think of that. What about the others?" Shukaku changed the topic. "Is it just the three of us doing this?" "We'll need to meet with the other jinchuriki and our brethren," Kurama admitted, glancing down at the children. They were content to listen. "I'd suggest the hidden stone jinchuriki first. Son and Kakuo have been there for a long time now. And a group called Akatsuki is close to their territory." "Akatsuki?" Shukaku queried. Kurama explained, and the other tailed beasts bristled at the idea of such dangerous ninja trying to hunt them down. Fu and Gaara's expressions hardened. According to the San and Jiraiya, it's possible the hidden stone works with Akatsuki from time to time. That puts Son and Kakuo's jinchuriki in the most immediate danger after us. So my plan is as follows: we set up a base in the land of whirlpools and then try to make contact with Son and Kakuo. Gyuki and Matatabi are in the land of lightning, we'll reach out to them afterwards. I've no idea where Seiken is, and I do not know if Isobu has been reincarnated yet." "Reincarnated?" Fu wondered aloud. "When a jinchuriki dies with a tailed beast still inside of them, the tailed beast dies as well," Shukaku explained. "But we reform after a while. Isobu the Three Tails died with his jinchuriki some time ago. I haven't felt him since, but eventually he'll be reborn." Gaara nodded and hesitantly looked amongst the group. "Then we're ready." Kurama grunted. "We'll head north first to set up a false trail towards the Valley of the End, then we will travel east towards our true destination. There will be pursuers. We will be hunted. One jinchuriki running off is a problem. For three to join forces and abandon their homelands is enough to alarm the villages. You must be hard now. They will come and they will do whatever is necessary to retrieve us from within you. We keep each other safe," Naruto said. "Promise." "Promise," Fu agreed with a grin. Chimay's wings fluttered. Gaara's voice was quieter, unused to such talk. "I promise." Shukaku agreed and Kurama was satisfied. "Then we leave now, with all haste." Everything was quiet at the start of their journey until they ran into a group of sound ninja Orochimaru subordinates, apparently en route to retrieve Sasuke from the village. The kid is the Nine-Tails Jinchuriki, the only woman of the four said. Lord Orochimaru might want him. Our mission is to retrieve Sasuke, another pointed out. Not. We don't have time for this, Kurama hissed into their minds. They were close enough that limited telepathy between the beasts and their Jinchuriki was possible. They serve Orochimaru, their enemies. Wipe them out. I'll do it, Gaara muttered, eyes narrowed as he began to build up a massive quantity of chakra. Give me a moment. Fu's wings suddenly vibrated until they produced a high-pitched thin screech. A jinjutsu of Chime's creation. Tailed beast art. Dragonfly song. The sound four recoiled from the terrible shrieking, but only the big hulking brute of the group was caught long enough to matter. Naruto lunged at him with a burst of speed enhanced by Kurama's chakra and slashed the man's throat open. He gurgled, clutching at the mortal wound as he fell and died. You fucking brat. The woman howled, readying a jutsu only for Fu to drive a savage kick backed by blistering speed into her. She blocked it, if only just, and was sent flying away. Naruto took the opportunity to spit air bullets at the other two, who retreated further. Gaara went through a flurry of hand signs before clapping his hands together. Sand tsunami. Naruto and Fu retreated as sand roared up from the earth in a tremendous wave, swallowing the forest before them. The enemy ninja danced furiously to escape, only to cringe as Fu cast another sound-based jinjutsu on them. It gave Gaara's sand a chance to snatch the group and bury them alive. But their chakra started to spike. Naruto called a warning. Their curse marks. I know, Gaara slammed his hands into the sand. Giant sand burial. Shockwaves roared out from where he cast the jutsu, compressing and crushing everything within the sand. Trees creaked, groaned, and fell over as the bark splintered under the insane pressure. Someone screamed amidst the wreckage, one of the sound four, though Kurama couldn't identify which one specifically. But he felt two of them die within moments. One left, the fox told them. Injured. Ha. They didn't expect to get their asses busted like that. Shukaku cackled. Serves them right. Enough. We finished the last one off and move, Kurama growled. No survivors, no witnesses. Gaara, how's your chakra? Are you doing okay? That was some jutsu. Chimei said cheerfully. I'll be fine, Gaara muttered, sounding not uncomfortable, but certainly not used to praise. Naruto set a hand on his shoulder, and he briefly stiffened. Here, Naruto pressed some of his chakra into the other boy, rejuvenating some of the lost energy. Gaara nodded his thanks, though he didn't quite relax. Kurama helped Naruto track the last of the sound for the woman and found her with her legs crushed and useless. She tried to play a flute as they approached, the curse mark empowering her chakra, but the tailed beast snapped their jinchuriki out of the attempted jinjutsu with contemptuous ease. Fu launched a silken string at the woman and bound her tight, dragging her in close. She tried to throw a kunai at them, only for Gaara's sand to intercept it. Another jinjutsu courtesy of Fu with her wings stunned the last of Orochimaru's agents, and Naruto leapt over to drive a blade into her heart. And that was it. That jinjutsu is handy, Naruto told Fu. Right? Chimei taught me that one first. It's really quick to start, so it stuns people fast, but it isn't very powerful. If they felt it once or twice, it's more or less useless. They weren't hurt, which was the important thing, but to overwhelm their enemies so quickly had cost them time and chakra. Not to mention a big move like Gaara's sand tsunami in the middle of the forest would attract attention. We have to move, Shukaku advised. I love a good show, but someone is gonna take notice of this. Agreed, Kurama grunted. Let's go. The Jinchuriki acknowledged them and ran off. Unfortunately, Gaara's massive jutsu did draw attention. A group of leaf ninja had been dispatched to find and retrieve Naruto after it was discovered that he'd slipped out of the village. It was most of his old classmates. Shikamaru was at the head with his team, as well as Kiba, Shino, Neji, Tenten, Sasuke, and Sakura. Naruto knew Lee hadn't come due to his healing injuries, but he was relieved that Hinata wasn't there. He didn't want to fight her. It was clear Tsunade had sent his old classmates to try and convince him to return peacefully or overwhelm him if he refused, but they obviously weren't expecting Naruto to have company. They caught up to the group at the Valley of the End, near the border they intended to follow east. Naruto's new team stood on the statue of Madara Uchiha, while the Leaf Ninja stood upon Hashirama Senju's likeness. Shikamaru stared at the group of Jinchuriki, and Naruto could practically see the gears turning in his mind. You planned this a while ago, didn't you? That's none of your business, Naruto retorted. Of course it's our business. Kiba snarled. What the hell are you thinking, running off with this psycho, and who's the chick, anyway? Hidden Waterfalls Fu, she answered with a grin. Whatever. Hinata was a fucking mess when we found out you left, you know that she's worried sick about you. Naruto's heart clenched painfully, but he couldn't back down now. I can't stay there, Kiba. So what, you run off with enemy ninja? Ino frowned disapprovingly. What do the three of you even have in common? Fu's smile turned nasty. You might not like the answer to that. Enough, Kurama rumbled in the minds of the Jinchuriki. The longer we stay here, the sooner the more dangerous ninja will arrive. Either they back off or it's a fight. Naruto, we have orders to bring you back to the leaf. I don't want to fight any of you, but if you don't surrender, we won't have another option. Naruto's fist slowly clenched. Don't make me do this, Shikamaru. We should be the one saying that. Sakura finally lost her temper with him. You just left us. We're a team. I have a new team. Sasuke's eyes flashed with the Sharingan. It's that easy for you, huh? Naruto felt rage flux within him at the sight of the Dojutsu. You're part of the reason I won't stay in the village. You and those damned eyes. Naruto Kurama growled, warning him not to stall, but the boy's anger was cresting like a great wave after years of building, and there was no stopping it now. You know what this place is called? This is the Valley of the End, where the first Hokage fought Madara Uchiha to the death. Madara put the nine-tailed fox under a jinjutsu with a Sharingan and manipulated him, Naruto snarled. The fox was sealed away into my mom years later. One of your fucking clan attacked her right after I was born and stole the fox. And Uchiha set the nine-tailed fox on the village all those years ago. Sasuke looked genuinely shocked, as did most of the others. Gaara and Fu said nothing, though they watched him carefully. Naruto wasn't anywhere near done. Uchiha as good as killed my mom, he hissed furiously. My dad was the fourth Hokage, he died sealing the fox into me. I'm the nine-tails jinchuriki now. That's why so many people in the village treat me like garbage. Your clan is responsible for all of that. Kurama felt the boy's chakra spike as he clapped his hands together. Naruto's eyes flashed red, pupils slitting. If that weren't enough, the old third Hokage put me on a team with you and Kakashi, so the Sharingan could control me. You're a chain around my neck and I won't be your weapon. Gaara and Fu both flexed their chakras, realizing a fight was inevitable for how agitated Naruto was. The Leaf Ninja tensed, ready to defend themselves. Naruto, Shikamaru held a hand out in an attempt to calm him down. Come on man, I get why you're pissed but don't. Higher style. Burst breath. A stream of intense focused flame seared across the river between the two statues. Sasuke retaliated with a fireball jutsu, and the resulting blast created enough heat to make the water steam and boil beneath it for a few moments. Sasuke was scowling. I didn't know about any of that. What do you want me to do about it? There were only 3 Uchiha left alive, Naruto's voice was an ear-feral growl. I want that number down to 0. Fu finally chose to act, hands flashing through signs. Water style. Raging wave. The river roared to life in a massive flood and surged towards the Leaf Ninja, who were hurled over the cliff towards the lake despite attempting to dodge. All 3 Jinchuriki leapt down after them, watching as the other teens struggled to collect themselves. While they regrouped, Kurama dragged the 6 of them into joint telepathy. We have to make this quick. Overwhelm them, kill them if you must. Sure you want to do this, Naruto? Fu asked as she settled into a fighting stance. They're your friends, aren't they? I'm not turning back now, Naruto replied. I've made my decision. I choose us. The Leaf Ninja had all swum up from the lake, now standing on the waves rising and falling from Fu's flash flood. Sasuke was the first one back, Sharingan flashing and temper ready to snap. Kurama sneered at the sight, but it was Shukaku who spoke. I've got an idea. The plan was quickly shared amongst their group and approved. Gaara hung back, made hand signs and focused his chakra with a slight boost from Shukaku. Fu and Naruto charged their enemies. Naruto immediately summoned an army of shadow clones, more than enough to even the odds. Sasuke blasted a fair few with a fire-style jutsu, though he was stopped when Naruto spat an air bullet and pummeled him beneath the surface of the water. Hiba and Akamaru were juiced up on food pills and lunged with their classic two-man assault into the clones. Shikamaru hung back with Ino and Choji, probably trying to formulate a plan. Tenten was hurling a veritable storm of blades into Naruto's personal army, cutting down the clones one after another, while Neji defended her from any who got too close. Shino had been thrown back close to Sakura and was setting his bugs loose. Fu lit up at the sight. An insect jutsu, I've never seen someone else use that before. That's awesome. I accept your compliment, but you're still my enemy, Shino replied, sending his chakra beetles flying towards her. Fu beamed, hands rushing through signs. You're cool, but I can't let you do that. Don't take this personally. Her wings suddenly vibrated with a unique hum, barely perceptible to the human ears. She made one last sign with her hands. Tailed beast art. Great insect god. Shino's beetles suddenly stopped in the air, swarming in confusion before they wheeled around and flew towards their master. The boy watched in shock, then horrified disbelief as Fu took total control of them. They ignored his chakra commands despite Shino's frantic signals. Sorry, but Chimei is the greatest of all insects. Fu told him proudly. They answer first to him. Shino fled and Sakura too when she set the chakra beetles after them. Fu couldn't focus on them too long, however, as Kiba and Akamaru leapt into the air as high as they could in an attempt to strike her. Hey. Leave my teammate alone. He slashed at her with his claws only for the wind to get blown out of him when Naruto shot up out of nowhere and knocked him down with a ferocious punch. Fu flipped past Akamaru, who had transformed into Kiba, and kicked him into the water. Now. Naruto barely had a chance to react to Shikamaru's voice as he fell back to the water, then he heard Ino a second later. She was aiming for his landing. Ninja art. Mind transfer jutsu. He went numb, frozen for a moment and blank in his thoughts. Ino's voice sounded in his ears. Sorry Naruto, but you can't. Bad move, girl. Ino froze and Naruto had a brief glimpse of his mindscape where Kurama was staring the girl down. She stared at the fox in sheer terror as he sneered, then roared so loudly it was nearly a physical force. She was immediately evicted from Naruto's mind, shrieking as she was forced back into her own body. The girl collapsed and would have sunk beneath the waves if Choji hadn't caught her. Ino. It didn't work. Shikamaru recoiled as Naruto lunged at them. He knew full well the Nara boy was the smartest and probably the most dangerous, given enough time, of their class. Unfortunately, Sasuke chose that moment to reinsert himself into the fight. He'd recovered from the air bullet and shot up from below the water, driving a fist into Naruto's chin. The blonde spat, snarling as he was hurled back. You good? Fu asked as she flew by. I'll be fine, he growled. Most of his clones had been destroyed by now, though they'd done their part just fine. Ino was down, Shino compromised with his insects turned against him, but the others were preparing to attack. Unfortunately for them, Gaara had completed his preparations. He stretched his arms out and made a slow lifting motion. The leaf ninja stared but couldn't see anything. No sand left his gourd. And then Shikamaru had a moment of pure horror as he figured it out. Get out of the lake. Too late. It was wet and messy, but the lake bed was sand, powdered rock ground down from the battle between the first Hokage and Madara Uchiha, and yet more had been made in the decades since by the elements. A great soaking dune rose above the waves at Gaara's command, surrounding the leaf ninja like the maw of a great beast. It was slow and they managed to leap up and above it before it could get too high, but Fu was happy to enact the next part of Shikaku's plan. Water style. Water dragon jutsu. 3 of the creatures erupted from the waves all around the trap and struck at the ninja still in the air. One of them grabbed Shikamaru, Ino, and Choji in its jaws before slamming them back into the center of Gaara's trap. Another caught Kiba, but not Akamaru, snapping after the transformed ninja hound while the boy scrambled to escape its maw. A third smashed into Neji's rotation, but Fu fed it chakra until their adversary fell back to the lake where he was crushed beneath the waves. Naruto spat air bullets at the others, driving Tenten back into the trap, though she leapt out just as quickly to his annoyance. Sakura and Shino were still trying to retreat from the swarm of insects chasing them in a frenzy, but an attack from one of Fu's water dragons tripped them up. The beetles swarmed both of them, and they cried out as the insects feasted upon their chakra, caring nothing for their once allies. Fu subsequently hurled them into Gaara's trap when they were fully drained and immobilized. Gaara brought his hands together and clamped them tight, forming a huge sphere of sand to encapsulate the ninja within. He could have easily killed them then, but instead he gave a great heave and the sphere was thrown against the cliffside. His chakra adhered the sand to the stone, pinning the leaf ninja there and leaving them completely trapped. Only Sasuke, Neji, and Tenten had managed to avoid capture. Naruto placed his hand on Gaara's shoulder as the boy briefly sagged. Here. More chakra was pressed into him to help with the recovery. Lifting the lake bed had been a massive effort for how drenched and weighed down the sand was. But between Naruto and Shukaku's grudging assistance, he was ready to fight again in moments. Fu? Naruto asked. I'm good. Water jutsu are a lot easier when there's lots of water around, she snickered. Enough with the games, Kurama ordered. Yes, most of them are done, but 2 of the 3 left are troublesome. End this. We will not be alone for much longer. They became serious at his warning. The chakra of their tailed beast surged through the veins of the jinchuriki, and they attacked. Gaara engaged Neji, sand flying rapidly from his gourd and a little more rising from the lake again. It forced a Hyuga on the defense, his fighting style was not suited to dealing with Gaara's in any way. Tenten tried to put some space between herself and Fu as she frantically hurled weapons at her, but juiced up on Chime's chakra as she was, it was an effort in futility. Fu blitzed around Tenten in a split second and twisted, driving a brutal kick back with incredible momentum into her spine. The breath was blown out of Tenten as she was sent skipping across the waves. Fu chased after her, water-style jutsu surging from the lake at her command. Naruto and Sasuke slammed into each other, catching the fists thrown and engaging in rapid hand-to-hand combat. The Sharingan helped Sasuke keep up, but Naruto was savage and faster than ever, with Kurama's chakra empowering him. Every blow he landed jarred the Uchiha child far more than what he received. The punch caught Sasuke in the stomach and sent him airborne. Both boys instantly unleashed fire-style jutsu upon each other, generating another explosion. Sasuke landed on the waves, easily regaining his balance. Not far away, Naruto could see Fu as she finished Tenten off and flew back to rejoin them. Gaara was struggling against Neji, who was just slippery enough to avoid being hit despite being unable to get in close. But with Fu coming back to assist, he was certain they could overpower the Hyuga boy. Naruto, we're trying something different, Kurama decided. This has gone on too long already. His power bubbled up and out of Naruto's flesh. He roared, canines sharpening to fangs and nails turning into claws. He fell to all fours as his hair and whiskers bristled, eyes going red. Chakra swelled around him, taking the rough shape of the fox within, with a pair of long ears and a single flowing tail. Sasuke stared at him, uncertain and stunned by the transformation. Naruto howled, loosing a shockwave, and leapt for the Uchiha. Now when he struck, the chakra cloak lashed out with Kurama's will even if Sasuke could dodge Naruto's attacks. He was slammed again and again, sent skipping across the waves. Every time he tried to regain his balance, Naruto was back on him, slashing like a madman to bring him down. Sasuke was still going and it was pissing him off. Would you drop dead already? I don't get how you can just turn on us like this. Sasuke retorted. Did any of it matter to you? I don't give a damn why the Hokage put us on the same team. Both of us were alone for years. I thought we had that in common, at least. Whose fault is that? Naruto snarled, chakra tail lashing. You knew your family. Mine was destroyed by your fucking clan as soon as I was born. I didn't have anything to do with the Uchiha who set the nine-tailed fox loose. I didn't kill your parents. Sasuke protested. You're one of them. That's all I care about. He slashed again, and his chakra arm struck the quick guard Sasuke threw up, sending him skidding across the waves. But he kept his footing and met Naruto's glare with the Sharingan. Did you ever even think of us as friends? Or was I just imagining things? Naruto's eyes narrowed, and he rose up from all fours to stand properly. He held a hand out and the Rasengan formed, gleaming and spinning with beautiful violence. You're my friend, he answered. And I have hated you from the first day I saw your Sharingan. And he charged. Sasuke swore, forming Chidori and rushing to meet him. The impact was devastating, but Naruto was the stronger of the two, with Kurama's power bolstering him. Desperate as he was overpowered, Sasuke dragged his friend into a Jinjutsu with a Sharingan. Naruto's Rasengan vanished and the Chidori slipped past, and then Kurama seized the Uchiha with his own power, dragging the boy into his mindscape for an instant that made an eternity's difference. Sasuke stared up at the fox. Kurama's lip curled to expose terrible fangs. Until the Sharingan is destroyed forever, there will never be peace. Goodbye, whelp. The Chidori faded, though it managed to scrape a mark through Naruto's forehead protector around his neck. Sasuke snapped out of it a moment too late, watching as Naruto's hand came down in a blur of motion. And all he knew was pain. The Kakashi arrived shortly after the battle concluded with Guy and several more Leaf Ninja. The young ones were all alive, though in various states of injury. Most had been trapped to the cliff wall by Gaara's sand and had to be slowly dug free. Neji and Tenten were unconscious, though they quickly came to. The worst off by far was Sasuke. Across his face were bloody claw marks that left a terrible wound. Kakashi knew in an instant that Sasuke's left eye was ruined. The boy was thankfully out cold, probably from shock and blood loss. Naruto was gone. It took them weeks to get to the eastern coast, slowly and carefully moving along the borders between countries until they finally reached the ocean. Most of that time was spent trying to avoid leaving any sort of trail, which had to be done by crisscrossing into separate territories, which meant they had to constantly avoid any border patrols. Once they were on the coastline, they could afford to just make a straight shot to the islands that made up the hidden Whirlpool Village or what was left of it. Only the chakra of the tailed beasts kept the young jinchuriki from slipping beneath the waves when they grew tired. Miles of water lay between them and the islands they sought out. All crossings had been destroyed by those nations who had destroyed the village decades earlier. They reached the first island by the end of the first day. It was a relief to be back on dry land, but it wasn't the home island of the Uzumaki clan they were looking for. That lay further east, further out to sea. It was 4 more days before they found the ruins of the hidden village. The island was surrounded by whirlpools of varying sizes, making it too dangerous to cross on foot. Gaara carried himself and Naruto on his sand, while Fu flew alongside them to reach it safely. Nature had overtaken the village to the point that fragmented buildings were almost entirely concealed in greenery. With the sensory abilities they'd honed over the last few months, Naruto and Kurama were able to confirm no people were present. Well, Fu scanned the devastation with wide eyes. It's not much. I did tell you it was a ruin, Jiraiya reminded her. It's enough, Naruto said. We'll make it our home. Come on, let's find a place to spend the night. We'll figure out what to do from there. They wound up taking shelter in a large hut of sand created by Gaara, carefully compacted and fused together with his chakra to hold its shape. It was close to the lake that cut the ruined village in half, providing them with a source of valuable fresh water. They left the dilapidated buildings untouched. After decades of weathering, none of the structures remaining were suitable for living. Most were little more than piles of rubble covered in greenery. The weather turned that evening, raining heavily upon their shelter. Gaara's compacted sand hut was watertight, and Fu added some stability with her chakra silk. The wind howled fiercely outside. "You'd best get used to it," Kurama told them. "This sort of weather will be common enough out here. It's not bad as long as we're not getting wet," Naruto shrugged. He had several of his summoning scrolls out and had released some supplies he'd stored in the last few weeks. They'd already eaten dinner, though they were on limited rations for the time being. Gaara was already lying on his sleeping mat, listening to the storm outside. Fu peeked out through a glass window they'd salvaged and stuck in the wall of the sand hut. The girl whistled. "I don't think I've ever seen a storm that big before. They pick up strength further offshore," Jimei said. "The hidden waterfall village is inland enough that you've never had to worry about weather like this. Everything's going to be soaked when it clears up," Shukaku complained. "It'll dry once the sun comes out," Kurama rumbled. "What's our plan now?" Gaara asked hesitantly. He'd been the quietest of the trio by far, slowly learning how to really communicate with people for the first time in years. "We have a shelter set up," Naruto answered. "I could send out a bunch of clones tomorrow to check out the island. I want to explore it too," Fu exclaimed. "Naruto will leave some clones to continue working on the shelter," Kurama decided. "The three of you will explore the island. Identify possible shelters and resources. Once we have a good idea of the island's layout, we'll start preparing defenses. Do you think they'll actually track us all the way here?" Shukaku was skeptical. "Our trail is pretty hard to follow." "Be that as it may, I'll be damned if we're recaptured for being careless," Kurama growled. Shukaku silently agreed with that sentiment. Jimei mirrored him. They came to know the island well in the following weeks, exploring for hours on end each and every day. Gaara expanded their sand hut more as time went on, to the point that they had their own rooms. Despite that, they spent the most time in the first and now the largest room, where they performed their various daily tasks. "Naruto, how do you?" Gaara frowned. "I can't quite get it." Naruto peered over at the other boy's work and set his own project aside to help him out. "Like this. So tie it here." They were currently preparing a few extra fishing rods. Naruto had brought some simple ones with him from the village, but they needed some with longer lines for the deeper waters around the island. Naruto had taught himself how to fish when he was 3 just to eat better. Fu knew how as well and supplied the longer lines with her special chakra silk. Gaara, having grown up in the desert all his life, had no idea how to fish. With some guidance, he'd used his sand to shape some fishing hooks from steel they'd found amidst the village wreckage. "You boys ready yet?" Fu asked, holding her new rod and a woven silk basket with an excited grin. All three were leaving some clones in the hut and more to keep working on their bolt holes around the island for the day. In the meantime, Fu had suggested they take a well-earned break from all their work the past few weeks to relax as a team and to fill up their rations. Naruto tugged on Gaara's line to make sure it would hold and nodded. "I think we're good." They headed out to the beach on the south side of the island, sitting on rocks and casting out towards crevices Naruto and Fu recognized as hiding places for fish. Bait had been easy enough to find on the island, a few sweeps of the silk basket Fu had made in the shallows, and they had plenty of tiny fish to set on the hooks. She set up another basket in the water near the rocks, rigged with bait for crabs, and weighed down with some rocks. Gaara watched Naruto hurl his line a bit further out with practiced ease. "How do you get it to go so far?" "Here." Fu set a rod between some rocks and stood next to him. She helped take the fishing rod with his hands and pulled it back over his shoulder. "So you pull it back like this, hold the line with your finger so it doesn't catch anything behind you and then woo." She let it fly and the line sailed clear over the waves and into some deeper water. Fu backed off with a grin as Gaara stared, a little dumbfounded. "You'll get it. It takes practice. There was this one time." "Fu, your line's running," Naruto called. "Wah." The blonde laughed as she almost tripped to scramble after her fishing rod, which was yanked from the rocks and into the air. She leapt after it with her wings extending, catching the gear with a shout of victory. "Oh, no, you don't. Come to mama." Naruto snickered gleefully as she fought her catch, while Gaara watched with bemusement until his line twitched. "Oh. Is something on the line?" "Something's nibbling." Naruto cast one more glance at Fu's antics while he made his way over to the other boy. "So wait until you feel the line twitch and give it a little tug. If the hook sets, it'll start fighting." Gaara was patient until the line twitched again and he tugged back. Naruto knew it wasn't quite enough. A bit more sharply next time. He did as was suggested and sure enough, the tip of the rod started twitching madly. "There you go. Now pull it in." It wound up being a decently sized catch, which they promptly deposited in one of the baskets. Gaara seemed rather pleased to have pulled it in. Fu's own catch was of a similar size, though it had twice as much fight. They spent the whole day fishing, going to a few different spots until they had baskets full of fish and crab. They were tired and messy and all three of them stank, but they were brimming with contentment. Once they'd gotten cleaned up and prepared a dinner of seafood and fruits found on the island, the three jinchuriki sat together in their hut around the fire and enjoyed their meal. Fu cracked open a crab leg and passed some of the meat to Gaara. "Ever tried this before?" No, he accepted the small offering and eyed it curiously before taking a bite. Yes, there is. Nothing like eating something just hours after it's been caught, Fu beamed, eating her own morsel with a pleased hum. Naruto snorted. You're gonna need another bath for how messy crab legs are. Worth it, she sang, unabashed, and reached for another leg. Training started again once they'd effectively settled the island to the satisfaction of the tailed beasts. Traps had been prepared and there were warning systems in place to alert them of any intruders. It wasn't as well defended as it could be, but it was suitable enough for the time being. Mastery of the tailed beast's chakra was first and foremost on the agenda. They needed to become adept at using the strength of the beasts if they wanted to match the truly dangerous ninja out in the world. Traveling to the hidden stone to find the 4 and 5 tails was out of the question until they were aptly prepared. Kurama ordered their spars to begin on the largest wreckages of the island to effectively destroy what little remained of the village. We can reshape it as needed in time, Kurama explained in the mindscape of the tailed beasts. But the ruin does little more than stand in our way for now. Our chakra will help nature fully reclaim it and give us a clean slate to work with. How? Fu asked curiously. We tailed beasts are living masses of natural chakra, Shukaku explained. Our power directly influences the world around us. Like how Kurama's chakra can heal and restore dying plants, Naruto said. All of us can do something that simple, Jimei stated. But you get the idea, right? Whatever we destroy tends to be reclaimed by nature quickly, our chakra accelerates the processes of the world. With that in mind, the jinchuriki began their training amidst the ruins of the hidden Whirlpool Village. Any wreckage remaining was annihilated in their spars as they tapped the power of their tailed beasts. Naruto's chakra tails too at the moment lashed as he leapt after Fu, slashing at her in a flurry of blows. She retaliated with a silken whip that caught around his wrist and hurled him away from her, straight into the charging Gaara. Gaara's arms and gourd were changed into Shukaku's arms and tail, though now he too was enveloped in the red chakra of the beasts. Naruto's fist smashed into Gaara's, the raw force enough to obliterate the debris around them. Fu blurred overhead and threw a brutal kick that was barely caught by Gaara's sand tail, which hurled her away. Naruto roared, unleashing a shockwave to throw Shukaku's jinchuriki off before the sand could catch him. With a vicious grin, he jumped after his friends. The spars were effectively free-for-alls, though they switched things up from time to time. Sometimes they would fight 2-on-1 or go up against a ton of clones at once. Gaara and Fu once fought Naruto in his chakra cloak without the assistance of their tailed beasts, and they rotated through the role whenever one side or the other was defeated. New jutsu were taught and created as their talents blossomed beneath the tutelage of the beasts. It was good for getting them valuable experience dealing with other jinchuriki, but it also helped get the children used to using massive amounts of chakra. And true to form, the constant fighting soon turned the rubble of the hidden Whirlpool Village into little more than a layer of debris that was consumed rapidly by nature. 6 months after they left the villages, just before winter arrived, the tailed beasts decided their jinchuriki were ready. They were stronger. Prepared for any situation. In the ultimate worst-case scenario, the 3 of them could funnel enough chakra together with the tailed beasts to teleport all the way back home, though it would leave them heavily drained for a while. The jinchuriki had loosened the seals within them over time, but they didn't yet have full access to the powers of the beasts. It would do for now. As before, they journeyed across the sea to the border of the Land of Fire, though this time they avoided it entirely and traveled straight through the Land of Hot Springs. They did crisscross the border between the Land of Fire and the Land of Rice, not eager to be in Orochimaru's territory, either. Those days were tense. The Land of Iron was easy enough to get through once they were through the Land of Rice, and though Fu longed to travel through the Land of Waterfalls, they decided it was too risky someone would recognize her. As a result, they crossed north up to the border and traveled along the coast, only going to land to make camp for the night. Finally, they were at the Land of Earth, the territory Son Goku and Kakuo had called home since the first Hokage sold them to the Hidden Stone Village. All of them had been tense since leaving home, but they rose to high alert in the Land of Earth. Not only was this home to enemy ninja who would gladly capture them for their own use, they didn't know if the jinchuriki of the stone would even be friendly to them. Worse still, the Hidden Stone was suspected to work with the Akatsuki. The last thing they needed was to run into a ninja like Itachi Uchiha all the way out here. They were stronger, but they weren't ready for that. To improve their odds of staying concealed, they disguised themselves with stolen clothing and hid any suggestion that they were ninja. They used transformation jutsu as well, changing their most prominent features into traits that stood out less. Naruto was the best at it, he'd long mastered transformation, sometimes to steal in the leaf or just for his own amusement. He was good at disguising himself. Fu was a bit too exuberant and Gaara too uncertain. Whenever they had to travel to a small town, Naruto was usually the one who went in first, posing as a traveler. They carefully asked around for information, playing as children hoping for a good story most of the time. Naruto posed as the leader or sometimes as an older sibling trying to care for the other two. It wasn't easy, asking straight after a tailed beast or jinchuriki was too suspicious. They avoided ever speaking with enemy ninja who might have been visiting a town for one job or another, although they were the ones who would probably know the most about the jinchuriki in question. To make matters worse, the land of Earth was huge. It was second only to the vast deserts of the land of wind, and more people lived there besides. But slowly, they got tidbits here and there. They found out that only one of the jinchuriki was actively working for the hidden stone village at the moment, Kakuo's, the Five Tails. Apparently, the Four Tails jinchuriki had gone into something of an early retirement at a small settlement. They didn't know exactly where, but were able to narrow it down to an area in the south, close to the border with several small countries. Weeks of careful traveling left the three jinchuriki antsy, but at last, they struck gold. They had come upon a small town mostly hidden in a mountain range, when all of the tailed beasts flicked to attention. "Son is here," Kurama immediately spoke via his telepathy. Really, Fu gasped. "Quiet," Kurama snapped. "We've found one of them, now the dangerous part begins. We don't know if he'll come with us or if he'll try to capture us for the hidden stone. We must be ready to flee immediately." They prepared a small camp in the wilderness outside of the mountain village, set up flying thunder god marks to warp in the event that Son's jinchuriki chose to attack them. The three of them got some rest and readied themselves for a fight if it came to that. Once they were ready, they carefully followed the lead of their tailed beasts to find their quarry. Son Goku's jinchuriki lived in a small hut on the outskirts of the town, isolated even in such a reclusive settlement. They watched him from the trees as the sun began to set, wary of actually approaching the man. The jinchuriki had a fire going and appeared to be cooking at the moment. As they watched, he pulled out a small wooden stool, then returned to his hut and pulled out another. Then another. And another. He finally sat on the first stool, facing towards the forest and sipping from a mug. Now and then, he would glance to the trees, eyes scanning carefully. "He knows we're here," Shikaku muttered warily. "NNN," Kurama grunted, tails lashing. Naruto didn't so much as twitch as he watched a stranger. They sensed around, but the jinchuriki was truly alone. Finally, the tailed beasts gave their approval to approach. Naruto took the lead, leaping into the open, though he stayed close to the trees. The stone jinchuriki snapped his eyes onto him and they stared at one another warily. Fu joined him, and then Gaara. The standoff was intense. Chakra fluxed, not enough to signal a fight, but the tailed beasts were all sensing each other from within their jinchuriki. Nobody was quite willing to get too close. In the end, Son Goku tentatively reached towards them in their minds, and each of the tailed beasts ventured one after another into the shared mindscape. A huge four-tailed monkey peered at his kin curiously. His jinchuriki stood before him, still wary. Kurama, Chimei, and Shukaku, Son's voice was almost as deep as the fox's. "It has been a long time." "So it has," Kurama rumbled back. "I admit, I'm surprised," Son said after a moment. "Seeing the three of you together like this is different," Chimei finished for him, wings quivering lightly. "But it's been a good kind of different. I see. Care to explain why you're here?" Son's jinchuriki broke his silence, brow furrowed sternly. "We're not here for a fight," Naruto answered, equally tense. "Unless you attack us first." The man snorted, though he observed the boy close for a few moments. "I've seen worse than 3 children. But looking at you now I'm reminded of a man I met long ago. You're the 4th Hokage's brat, aren't you? So what? I already know you fought him." "Enough," Kurama growled. "Leave old grievances with the dead. Such things do not serve our purpose." "And what is your purpose?" "We are here to ask if you would like to come with us," Chimei told them. "The 6 of us have decided to leave the villages behind and make a new home. We won't force you, but the offer stands if you're interested." The man's eyebrow quirked up. Son tilted his head, tails waving slightly. "Is that so? Foolish." The great monkey glanced down at his jinchuriki. "Rashi. You'll be caught eventually," Rashi muttered, shaking his head. "Leave your fantasies in your heads, children, and return home. You're more likely to die than we are," Gaara told him. "Oh? And here I thought you weren't looking for a fight. We aren't the ones who will come after you. A group called the Akatsuki plans to hunt the tailed beast soon." That made Rashi's gaze go sharp. "Akatsuki? You're sure?" "Itachi Uchiha tried to capture Naruto and myself for the Akatsuki a while ago," Kurama told him. "The San and Jiraiya kept us from being taken. He informed us that the jinchuriki will all be target soon. Akatsuki wants to possess us. They'll come for you sooner or later, mark my words. That lunatic Tadara knows your abilities, too." Son glanced back down to Rashi. "He'll tell them how to fight you in hand." The jinchuriki scowled. "The old geezer employs their organization now and then. They'd be betraying the stone by going after us." "They've already begun their hunt," Kurama reminded him with a sneer. "You think missing Nin would care?" The idea clearly had Rashi thinking. "What's your plan, then?" "I'd expect the Akatsuki would plan to hunt us one by one. To isolate us. As a group, we're more powerful than them and whatever the hidden villages can throw at us. Now that we've spoken with you, we'll try to get the message to Kakuo's jinchuriki, too. Then we'll reach out to the others. Do you want to bring all of the jinchuriki together? We're strongest together, Naruto said. And none of us want to be weapons for the villages. We're making a new home, just for us. Rashi's arms were crossed as he considered the idea. Son seemed more interested, though his gaze was fixed on his jinchuriki for the time being. Let me think about it, Rashi decided. I'll send a message to Han. But I think we've spoken enough for now. He and Son slipped out of the mindscape and the others soon followed. They hadn't moved, though it seemed little time had passed while they were speaking. Rashi sat back down on his stool and gestured to the other 3 seats around the fire. Well. Come sit, I suppose. They stayed with Rashi for a few days, though many times they retreated to their camp in the mountains to consider their situation. All 4 of them were aware of the tailed beast speaking with each other in the backs of their minds, though that conversation was often a private one. Rashi himself did not say much, though he allowed the children to share his food and home. He had spent more time living in isolation than they had, and so had a few tips to offer for improving their life back in the hidden whirlpool. They didn't train for obvious reasons, the idea was to keep their presence discreet, after all. What do you think? Fu asked anxiously round the campfire one night. Hard to say, Gaara muttered. He's difficult. I don't think he bears us any ill will, but we gave them our offer and warned them about the Akatsuki, Shikaku growled. We shouldn't stay here much longer. It's too risky. You think we should leave them? Look, I don't want Son to get caught, but I'm not willing to stick my neck out for his damn stubborn jinchuriki, either. Tomei sounded uncertain. Kurama. It is a decision that must be made both by beast and jinchuriki, the fox said at last. If they choose to stay, we must respect it. We couldn't overwhelm him without risk, in any case. At least he sent a warning to Kakuo's jinchuriki, Shikaku reminded them. True. Naruto jabbed at the fire with a stick, sighing. He'd hoped it would be easier than this, but it would be against their whole purpose to force Rashi to come along. They were trying to free the jinchuriki and tailed beasts, not imprison them. 2 more days, Naruto suggested after a minute. Then we leave, one way or another. We didn't come here to be captured. Gaara was silent for a moment before nodding and glancing at Fu. I agree. 2 days, Fu repeated. Okay. We can do 2 more days. 2 days might have been one too many. All of them felt the 5 tails enter the town, freezing in place as Kakuo's chakra was detected. Immediately, they were wary. It seemed the jinchuriki had gotten Rashi's message sooner than anticipated. He was making a beeline for the house. Naruto, Fu and Gaara bolted for the trees before Rashi could get so much as a word out. All 3 were ready for a fight to break out, as were their wary beasts. Their wariness increased when they got a look at the jinchuriki, who touched on the ground near Rashi's house in a rush of speed. He was a massive man. Rashi was roughly the same height as the children. Kakuo's jinchuriki towered over them, more than 6 feet and physically dominant to all the others by a solid margin. He also wore heavy red armor compared to Rashi's casual kimono, and his face was mostly covered by a mask save for his eyes. The man was built and armed to the teeth for battle. He was an imposing figure, to say the least. And Rashi greeted with a slight bow. Are they still here? Han demanded. His right hand was tucked inside his kimono, casual or grasping a weapon, none of them were sure. Rashi glanced towards the forest and the children immediately tensed, unsure if he meant to betray them. Han followed his gaze, though he didn't move. Young ones. I mean you no harm. Naruto glanced at Fu and Gaara. Both of them looked nervous and really, they had every right to be. He was a little scared, both of these jinchuriki were older, more experienced, and had brought their tailed beasts to bear during war before. Against the 2 of them, half-trained in the ways of jinchuriki as they were, the 3 of them had little chance. Not without obliterating everything in the area with the full force of their beasts. Naruto held his dad's kunai, flying thunder god jutsu at the ready. Both Fu and Gaara clutched their own weapons, marked long before they met Rashi with a seal for teleportation, if things got ugly. They slowly emerged from the forest, but didn't leave the tree line. Han studied them briefly, frowned, and glanced at Rashi. What did you tell them? Nothing, I did not have to. Isolation has done nothing for your manners. Han looked back to the wary children. I apologize for Rashi's behavior, he is as unsociable as his uncle. Did you just compare me to that? I am Han, jinchuriki of the 5 tails, Kakuo. He ignored his shorter companion and offered them a formal bow. Unsure, the 3 mirrored him and gave their own names, along with the names of their beasts. Han nodded, satisfied, and moved for Rashi's door. Come in, come in. We have much to speak of. Always making yourself at home without, Rashi muttered but didn't argue, waving the children to come in. Naruto exchanged a glance with Fu and Gaara. This would be interesting, to say the least. Han insisted on preparing dinner before they spoke. Rashi helped him with scarcely a word, seemingly resigned to his comrade's ways. Even so, Son's jinchuriki seemed more at ease with Han present. Once they all had bowls of stew and were seated around the small table inside the hut, Han pulled his mask down, set his hat to the side, and offered them a smile. Well. Imagine this, 5 jinchuriki sharing the same room. Has such a thing ever happened before? Doubtful, Kurama rumbled, causing Han to go still briefly. Kurama, a voice that must have belonged to Kakuo answered him. I wondered if I'd ever speak with you again. Kakuo? Long time no see. Chimei greeted enthusiastically. Yes, we're all happy to see you, Shikaku sounded bored. As always, you try to hide your true feelings, Son teased a Tanuki. What did you say? None of the jinchuriki seemed quite sure how to handle the sudden onslaught of speech ensuing within their minds. Rashi looked annoyed, but Han's face spoke of fascination. Enough of this, Kurama growled sternly. Let us take our conversation someplace quieter. The jinchuriki require sustenance without the lot of you making such a ruckus. With that, the beasts retreated to their shared mindscape, leaving the jinchuriki in silence at the table. But grief, Rashi grumbled, taking a bite of his stew. Hum now, Rashi, Han admonished. Didn't you make your home in such isolation to better understand the four tales? It is truly fascinating to hear them all speak with each other. If I don't get any peace, it only serves to annoy me. You're more like the old Tsuchikage than I remember. Compare me one more time to that damned old man. Anyway, Naruto interrupted, eyeing the 2 stone jinchuriki warily. Rashi grimaced and returned to tending his stew, but Han focused on him without argument. How much did Rashi tell you? He told me you were visiting him and to be wary of the Akatsuki, Han's brow furrowed. You'll have to explain in greater detail, I'm afraid. His message was brief. So they did. By the end, Han shot Rashi a mild glare. The red-haired man glared back. What? They're too stubborn for your own good. Of course we're going with them. That wasn't at all what the children were expecting. Don't make such a choice for me. You've already made it, you're just too damn stubborn to say it. Naruto, wasn't it? Which Akatsuki came for you again? Itachi Uchiha and a Miss Ninja I don't know, he frowned. He had a big sword. Blue skin. Hisam Hashigaki, Han looked back at Rashi. Deidara will tell them how you fight and he'll come for you. He'll even win if you take him alone, and he certainly won't be fighting alone. Rashi grimaced and took another bite of his stew. Han glanced at the children. What this stubborn fool means to say is that we're coming with you. You speak the truth, the jinchuriki will be stronger together. I'm quite tired of serving the Tsuchikage these days. That's treason. Han shot Rashi a look. Rashi looked back for a matter of moments before he snorted, twisting his face to hide the barest hint of a smile. Han just shook his head, though he seemed amused more so than anything. I will leave to gather supplies in the morning. We will go with you. You expect me to leave my hut to rot? You've set this house on fire 3 times that I know of. Once, you burned it to the ground because you didn't like the noises the door made when you opened it. Rashi said nothing. Fu pursed her lips, she seemed to be trying not to laugh. Fine. I don't like the walls, anyway. The next day, 5 jinchuriki left the land of Earth. Rashi burned his hut to the ground for good measure. He almost seemed happy to do so. Once more, they took their time weaving through the borders of the countries they traveled through, making their way back to the land of whirlpools. With a larger group, it was a little harder to go unnoticed, especially since Han stood out with his massive frame and armor, but they managed well enough. By the time they returned to their home, nearly 2 months had passed since the trio left to find the stone jinchuriki. Gaara was quick to expand their home with more rooms for Han and Rashi, though with the new additions came new ideas. They gathered in the living space together one evening, once all of them had settled in. With the tailed beasts in their minds, the jinchuriki began to discuss plans for really building a home. Gaara's sand hut was a suitable shelter, but it was, admittedly, not what any of them had in mind for a long-term residence. The beasts already had an idea prepared. When we were first formed by the Sage of the Six Paths, he built a home for us to grow, Kurama told them. A temple. Though the structure he made has long since crumbled away, a similar structure would serve as a home for all of us. I remember that place, Son said wistfully. Good times. What did it look like? Gaara asked curiously. Here, Shukaku briefly took a more prominent place in the boy's mind, guiding his movements to recreate the old temple out of sand. It was a small model of the original, but it was fascinating, a full circle like the moon, marked with unique symbols of an age older than any ninja could remember. The central structure was massive and branched out in 9 different directions for each of the beasts to possess their own residence. How can we build that? Fu scratched her head, frowning. Together, Son answered. It was a monumental effort. The sand hut served as their home while they began constructing the temple. Just getting the walls built took weeks, even with clones. Rashi's lava-style techniques were used to form the core. Gaara's sand shaped it properly before it could cool and reinforced it. Fu's silk was used to improve the structure's stability, insanely strong as it was. Naruto and Han were present for other tasks. Their jutsu wasn't especially useful for construction, but Naruto began making defensive Uzumaki seals and markings to protect the structure from intruders, which Han assisted with. When they weren't working on defenses, they often set off to gathering resources so the others could focus on building. When they were working on the largest structure, the younger Jinchuriki got to see for the first time what a full house transformation looked like. Rashi fully changed into Sun, towering over the skeleton of the temple in all his glory. In that massive form, he was able to create and control a tremendous amount of lava all at once. Gaara was able to keep up, if only just, by taking on a version 1 form as the elder Jinchuriki called it. His greater power allowed the manipulation of much more sand, which was necessary as they built a great dome to serve as the core structure's roof. Fu, too, scrambled to create silk enough to reinforce everything. But they had the core structure almost completely built a month after Rashi and Han started calling the island home. There was still so much to do, but it was a fantastic achievement. The group celebrated with a small feast of fish, fruits, and bread made from grains and herbs Rashi had brought along for a small farm. It was wonderful, even the likes of Kurama was in a good mood as the Jinchuriki and their beasts bubbled with contentment. It was a start. They started training properly again once the core structure of the temple was completed. The group still devoted a great deal of time to building, but Rashi and Han agreed that the younger Jinchuriki needed training to be prepared for opponents like the Akatsuki in the future. To call it valuable was an understatement. Kurama snorted as Naruto yelped, having been blown away by Han's ferocious power. The steam ninja was a mighty foe with incredible raw strength, even without Kakuo's assistance. Rashi was building more with Gaara, while Han put Naruto and Fu through their paces. Fu lunged at Han, engaging in a flurry of taijutsu blows, but she too was overwhelmed in a matter of moments. He was too big, too experienced, and too powerful. Naruto snarled and leapt back into the fray to help her out. The veteran ninja took them on with ease, even having breath enough to instruct them in the midst of the fight. He commented on the way they moved and attacked, correcting deficiencies and improving their posture. Naruto finally got fed up trying to overpower Han directly and jumped away to create some space. Wind style. Wind Dragon Jutsu. It was a mirror of Fu's Water Dragon Jutsu, a twisting, snarling current of wind that slashed at Han in a blur of speed. Fu shot away and attacked with a water-style technique just to put the pressure on, but Han was utterly unfazed. He threw a punch in the direction of Naruto's dragon, blowing it away with a huge steam blast. In the same motion, he twisted towards Fu and sent a steam blast her way, too. Fu swore colorfully as she was sent flying far into the air, waving the hot steam away with her wings. Naruto crouched and summoned up Kurama's chakra, only to have his call rejected. "You heard him," Kurama snickered to the boy, keeping his chakra to himself. "You'll get no help from me in this spar." Naruto snarled and spat a fire-style jutsu instead. Han countered with a water-style technique, and their dance continued. Days turned to weeks. Weeks to months. Fall turned to winter. Getting a little big for those, aren't you? Kurama commented in Naruto's mind. The boy held out a black shirt with a Uzumaki spiral on its back he'd worn for years, but now it barely fit him. He frowned. Most of his clothing was getting too small. Apparently, he was going through a growth spurt. "I guess we'll have to go to the mainland again," Naruto muttered. They did have to visit civilization now and again. Although much of what they needed was available on the island, clothes and other such things were only available elsewhere. Given the change in weather with the seasons, warmer clothing was a must. "You lot need to visit one soon anyway," Kurama pointed out. "Remember? You're all running out of scroll paper. And ink. And I think Rashi has a whole list," Naruto reminded him. He wanted to buy some seeds for more vegetables, too. "Good." Naruto shrugged on the black shirt for the time being. It was tight, but it would do for now. He made his way out of his part of the temple and headed towards Gaara's area. They'd finished spaces for the Jinchuriki and beasts currently living at the temple. Well, sort of. Each of the 9 temple branches was essentially a house for the Jinchuriki and their respective beast, but most of them were sparsely furnished at the moment. They were little more than large empty spaces with sleeping mats and some personal effects. That was fine. They'd add to their homes in time. Naruto knocked on the door to Gaara's home and heard Fu's voice call back to him. "Come in." He entered quietly, peeking in to see what was going on. Gaara was sitting on a stool with a towel around his neck and Fu behind him. Naruto raised an eyebrow at the kunai in her hands. Gaara glanced at him. "I asked her to cut my hair. Couldn't you just have a clone do it? She's better than I am." Honestly, Naruto was a little surprised Gaara was willing to let someone come that close to him with a blade. The boy he'd known for months now would never have allowed that when first they met. It was a sign of how far he'd come that he trusted Fu to do this for him. Naruto offered a slight smile. "I just went through my laundry looking for something warm to wear. I'm outgrowing all my shirts and stuff. So am I." Fu exclaimed. "Ugh, so many of my old clothes barely fit anymore. Good thing we're going to the mainland soon." Naruto leaned against one of the walls so he could face both of them. "We're gonna need some warmer clothes. Rashi thinks it's going to snow soon." "What's that like?" Gaara asked curiously. "Cold and wet," Fu answered. She ran her fingers through the boy's red hair, measuring carefully before she cut it with the kunai's sharp edge. "But it's also really, really fun. Have you ever made snow angels? I'll teach you how to make snow angels. I used to dump snow on vendors who refused to sell to me in the Leaf Village," Naruto snickered. "Or I'd pelt them with snowballs from rooftops." "Oh, snowball fights," Fu exclaimed. "I get Gaara on my team, dibs." "Now wait a minute." They got into an argument over teams, the main point being that Rashi and Han would absolutely melt any snowballs they tried to throw if Rashi bothered in the first place, and that Gaara would be able to guard against any incoming ordnance with his sand. "And that's why Gaara should be on my team. You can fly. You don't need another flying teammate, that's not fair." "I don't want to hear that from you, Mr. Clone Army." "Oh, please." Gaara suddenly laughed, a quiet sound that caught them both off guard nonetheless. He ducked his head slightly, as if averting his eyes. "I'm sorry," Gaara murmured. "Just thank you both for bringing me here. I wasn't sure if going with you would be good at first. We were enemies when we met, you know. But I'm really happy I came. I'm happy I'm here with you." Naruto felt his lips rise until his cheeks hurt, as he'd only felt a few times before in all his life. "I'm happy you're here too. Honestly, since coming here I'm happier than I've ever been. It feels good to have friends like this." Once he'd had friends in the Leaf, it was true, but so much had been kept secret and too much grief had been built up over the years. Here in their new home, everything was out in the open. They trusted each other and had made something special with that. The only true regret he'd left behind in the Leaf Village was Hinata. Naruto thought about her often enough, though he knew she belonged there. It was her home the same way the island was his now. It didn't mean there weren't days when he wished he could see her again. "It kind of bothered me, leaving the hidden waterfall village behind," Fu admitted. "I wasn't ostracized like you both were. But still looking back on it, I can see how sheltered my life was. They were kind, but they kept me from exploring. You have no idea how much I had to fight to be sent to the Chunin exams in the first place. Being here is like a breath of fresh air every day. Plus Jame's happy, too." "Kurama's nowhere near as grouchy these days," Naruto agreed, grinning. Just as he expected, the fox had something to say about that. "Grouchy? I'll show you grouchy. See if I help next time you spar with Rashi," Kurama growled. "I'm just teasing you," Naruto replied, still smiling. Fu and Shimei laughed as one. "Shukaku started teaching me more about magnet-style jutsu," Gaara told them. "It runs in my family, but he's better at it." "You're damn right." Shukaku cackled in their minds. "My jutsu is top tier. I've even got a sick sealing technique you Uzumaki upstarts can't match." "Oh? Let's hear it," Naruto's eyes gleamed with interest. They listened to Shukaku wax about his jutsu with the occasional question from Naruto and smart aleck comment from Kurama. Fu continued to cut Gaara's hair, the quiet cuts barely audible as red locks fell on the towel around his neck or drifted to the stone floor. It was domestic, peaceful, and utterly relaxing. As the jinchuriki continued to develop their abilities and train, an idea had begun to bubble up in Naruto's mind. Without full access to the keys and thus the seals of their tailed beasts, Naruto, Fu, and Gaara couldn't pull off a full house transformation jutsu to really set them loose. He felt bad about that. Kurama could speak and hear and see, but sealed away as he was, so much was lost to him. It seemed awfully dull, lying in that cage all the time, no matter what was happening in the outside world. He'd been trying to develop ways to change that. To give Kurama a direct link to all that lay beyond the seal. Naruto thought a transformation technique might do the trick. Not a full house transformation, but perhaps something halfway there. Naruto had spent weeks trying to figure it out, for all that Kurama insisted he didn't need to. The fox had been imprisoned for decades and barely remembered his brief moments of freedom. But that was exactly why Naruto wanted him to have this. He badgered the old fox until Kurama finally gave in and allowed some experimentation. The first few attempts, naturally, ended in failure for one reason or another. Naruto even transformed into a tiny fox with 9 absurdly fluffy tails at one point, which sent Kurama howling into a laughing fit so intense he couldn't focus for the rest of the day. But slowly, they started to get the hang of it. The pair of them got better at melding their minds together, which Han and Rashi had said was necessary for a fully realized house transformation. Kurama was able to feel things then, some brief sensations, but much was still lost. Many of Naruto's senses were muted compared to his own. Nearly a month into experimenting, they got what they wanted. Naruto had been sitting on a large tree branch swaying in the sea breeze, eyes closed and at peace, as his chakra melded and merged with Kurama's, easy as the tide that came and went. He'd been envisioning what he wanted for the transformation for hours now. A mix of the two of them. Naruto, but also Kurama. Steadily, his sense of smell sharpened and his ears picked up distant sounds, Kurama's senses at work. Naruto took a deep breath, let out a long sigh. Almost casually, he put his hands together and cast a jutsu. He leapt down from the tree and into the sand of the nearby beach, kicking off his sandals. The nails of his fingers and toes had lengthened and hardened into claws, which flexed and shivered. Canines had sharpened into fangs. His hair was a little wilder, with dark streaks rising into two long ears just like Kurama's. They twitched at every sound. The long, red-orange tail swayed behind him from the base of his spine, transformed to fit easily through the red and black kimono he'd chosen to relax in that day. When his eyes opened, they were blue, but the pupils were slits. Occasionally, they would flash red as Naruto and Kurama shared their sight. Naruto didn't move for a while, content to feel the breeze rushing along his skin and through the fur of Kurama's ears and tail. The fox was silent in his mind, but the boy sensed nothing short of blissful content emanating from his partner. It was working. Kurama could feel. He could see, smell, and taste. His ears twitched again as a seabird squawked somewhere overhead, and the fox nearly delighted in it. Naruto's lips curled into a soft smile. He took a step and began to walk along the beach, as one with Kurama for each and every second. It had been 3 years since the Valley of the End. 3 years since Naruto had abandoned the Leaf Village and disappeared with 2 other jinchuriki. 3 years since Sasuke had lost his left eye to his old teammate. The aftermath of the battle had seen him rushed to the hospital by Kakashi. No one else on the retrieval team had been quite as badly hurt as he was, which was the only silver lining to the whole situation. The jinchuriki team had absolutely had the opportunity to kill the majority of them. Even Gaara hadn't seriously hurt anyone. Sasuke had come out of surgery sans an eye, his right Sharingan crippled with its other half now gone. Well, not crippled exactly. Whether from the intensity of the fight or the aftermath of it, his Dojutsu had evolved to its 3-tomo stage. It was stronger, but without the second eye its potential was hindered. He had needed a transplant. Unfortunately, there were no Sharingan eyes lying around for such a procedure. Kakashi had, hesitantly, offered for Sasuke to take his Sharingan, but he'd declined. It hadn't felt right, not after his teacher finally spilled the beans on how he'd acquired the eye. To take it from him, offered willingly or not, felt like thievery. So he had asked for a normal eye in place of his lost Sharingan. It was black like the first had been, but it would never share the strength of the original. Tsunade had performed the operation herself. After he'd recovered, he'd set to training. Training, missions, and searching for any leads on Naruto's whereabouts. He'd been on half a dozen joint search missions with ninja from the Land of Wind and the Land of Waterfalls, who were working in tandem with the Leaf Village since their jinchuriki had also disappeared. None of their missions had been successful. There were rumors here and there, but those few leads amounted to nothing. Even Jiraiya had only learned a few things over the years, the most important being that other jinchuriki had disappeared beyond the first 3. No one knew where they were hiding, what their goal was, or what they were up to. But with Jiraiya on the case, Tsunade had ordered the search missions to cease, at least until the Sannin tracked the jinchuriki down. He was far more subtle than large groups of ninja running around the countryside chasing rumors and speculation. Sasuke hadn't liked that, but he begrudgingly admitted Jiraiya had better odds at finding Naruto than he did. It helped that Jiraiya had even set aside his search for Orochimaru, or at least, made Orochimaru a secondary priority, to concentrate on finding the wayward jinchuriki. So Sasuke focused on himself and improving his abilities. His entire class in the Leaf Village reached Chunin rank within a year of Naruto's disappearance. But along with Neji, Kankuro, and Temari, Sasuke achieved Jounin rank the year after that. In the past few months, he'd been given a new duty by the Hokage that he was still figuring out. Becoming the leader of a team of genin. Hanabi Hyuga strode confidently at his side, keeping up with Sasuke, despite the rigorous training he'd put the team through the day before. He had, perhaps, pushed them a little too far. Both of his other genin students were resting at home. Sasuke had given them the day off at Kakashi's suggestion, but Hanabi had shown up today anyway, insistent on training. He hadn't considered himself to be a teacher until Tsunade put him on the spot, but the Hokage had thought it would be good for him. To be fair, he had made a name for himself in the Leaf Village as a highly skilled ninja, despite just being 16 years old. He supposed it wasn't that odd. Itachi had been a captain in the Anbu Black Ops when he was just 13. Kakashi had been of some help, helping Sasuke guide his students in the right direction. But the copy ninja was busier than ever these days and didn't always have the time to help. In his absence, Sasuke had taken to relying on Asuma and Kurenai, the latter of whom was on leave due to her recent pregnancy. They were much better at explaining teaching than Kakashi was, no matter the respect Sasuke held for him. Hanabi's presence on his new team had initially confounded him, never mind that she was a little young to be on a genin team, nearly 2 years younger than her peers. He thought for sure Tsunade would assign her to Neji's team. But apparently conflict of interest due to them being cousins meant that wasn't the case. He didn't actually mind Hanabi that much. She was smart, quick on the uptake, and she never quit. She reminded Sasuke a bit of his old team. A little bit of him, Sakura, and even Naruto was within her. Smart, stubborn, and eager to claw out a place for herself in the ranks of Leaf Ninja. Ugh. He was too young to be sentimental like that. Tsunade had summoned him, and what members of his team were available, to discuss something. A new mission perhaps, though he did wonder. The missive summoning them had been oddly vague. Sasuke had learned long ago to read between the lines of such things. They entered the Hokage's office, and Sasuke took note of the people present. Tsunade of course, sitting at her desk. Shikamaru, Ino, and Choji stood beside Asuma and a trio of people he recognized as fire monks. According to Tsunade, Sasuke's team would be working with Asuma's former students and the fire monks to deal with a criminal known as Hirito. A grave robber, or so it seemed, though judging from Asuma's face there might have been something more to it. One of the monks did not seem pleased to be there, a boy roughly his age whom he learned was named Sora. Shortly after the briefing, Asuma left with his team and the monks, but Tsunade asked Sasuke and Hanabi to remain. "We suspect there is more to the situation than is apparent," she told them. Sora's father was once a member of the 12 Guardian Ninja who guarded the daimyo of the Land of Fire. But he and 5 others betrayed their lord and were cut down by Asuma. Sasuke was sensing a bud in that summary. Some years ago, Sora went on a rampage through the Fire Temple. Recently, there was an incident in which he rampaged again. According to reports, he was enveloped in a cloak of red chakra. It matches the description you gave me of Naruto at the Valley of the End. Sasuke stiffened. A jinchuriki. Hanabi looked at him with alarm in her eyes. Tsunade was frowning. "Not one that I'm aware of, but it's possible. I want you to watch him and see what you can learn. I don't think the Fire Temple means to attack us, but Sora resents Asuma for his part in the death of his father. His anger is a poisonous thing. I hate to ask this of you, but if the situation escalates to the point that a tailed beast is unleashed, you might be the best at handling it. Your Sharingan has grown significantly in the past few years. Maybe so, but you know as well as I do that my abilities will never peak so long as I only have one Sharingan eye. I don't think you give yourself enough credit. But I would only ask such a thing of you in the worst case scenario. For now, just monitor him. If he is a jinchuriki, it's possible Sora might be approached by a third party." Sasuke knew immediately what she was getting at. Either the Akatsuki would come for Sora or Naruto. Both possibilities were daunting. "We'll keep an eye on him," Sasuke assured her. Hanabi nodded and the pair of them slipped out of the office. Sasuke spent several hours with Asuma's team and the fire monks, during which time he quickly grew to despise Sora's presence. The boy was arrogant, angry, and rude to anyone he spoke to. He left them to train for a time, escorting Hanabi across the village to the Hyuga compound. "Do you think Naruto will come for him?" Hanabi asked suddenly. She'd been quiet since learning that Sora might be a jinchuriki. Sasuke knew what was going through her mind. "It's possible," he admitted. "But it's equally possible one of the Akatsuki will come looking for him." That particular group had been oddly quiet in recent years. They still did odd jobs for the Stone Village, according to Jiraiya's reports, but they hadn't made any significant moves. Considering who made up their organization, their inaction only made Sasuke wary. He couldn't help but wonder when he'd next face Itachi. For now, he focused on his student. "How is your sister?" Hanabi pursed her lips. "She's doing well. I think she spent the day with Kurenai-sensei. Kurenai's due to have her baby soon, isn't she?" "Yes." Hinata's been excited about it, the girl admitted. She took a deep breath. "Sensei, if Naruto comes here you will not be involved," Sasuke told her sharply, stopping to face her. Hanabi spun towards him, anger flashing in her eyes. But Sasuke raised one eyebrow, daring her to question the order. The Hyuga era scowled, but looked away. "I'm ready. If Naruto hadn't changed since I last saw him, I might entertain the idea of you fighting him," Sasuke said. "But that's not how time works. You've gotten a lot stronger, Hanabi, but you aren't ready to take on a full-fledged jinchuriki. If he comes here, he will not be alone. He'll bring others. I don't need to remind you that the last time we fought, they overwhelmed our whole team. That includes Neji." That managed to make Hanabi simmer down a little. She held immense admiration for Neji. That Naruto had defeated him in single combat during the Chunin exams 3 years ago never left her mind, save for when she was angry. "I don't want him near my sister," she confessed finally. Sasuke repressed a sigh. Hanabi had every right to be furious with Naruto. The aftermath of him abandoning the Leaf Village had not been pleasant, especially for her family. "We don't know for sure if he's coming," Sasuke hesitantly put a hand on her shoulder. He wasn't good at the whole comfort thing, but Kurenai had helped him at least get a grasp for the basics of it. "And if he is, at least we have some warning. What will I be doing? If he does show up? That will depend on the situation. But chances are I'll have you defending civilians," Sasuke admitted. "Are you sure I can't?" He gave her another look and Hanabi, stubborn though she was, knew what the answer would be. "Yes, sensei." "Come on," he removed his hand and turned to keep walking. "Let's get you home." The situation with Sora did, in fact, escalate out of control. There was a whole plot circulating around the boy, led by his thought-to-be-dead father, Kazuma. The plan seemed to consist of assassinating the Hokage, rather than the daimyo, this time not that any leaf ninja would allow the enemy to do such a thing. As for Sora, he had been made into an artificial jinchuriki with pieces of the nine-tailed fox's chakra left behind by the beast's attack on the Leaf Village 16 years prior. Once Kazuma made his move, the boy's power was unleashed and he raised as much hell as he possibly could. It wasn't a favorable scenario. Sasuke, along with a former Anbu known only as Yamato and the entirety of his old class, had been ordered to capture the rampaging jinchuriki. He attacked in a frenzy, the chakra cloak making him many times more destructive than he had any right to be. Sasuke had sent Hanabi away when Kazuma's plan was enacted, but she'd rejoined them after catching a group of the traitor's lackeys, trying to sneak up on them. He and his old class were keeping Sora occupied and steadily pulling him away from the village, where Kazuma wanted the jinchuriki to be. It was on the tip of his tongue to send her away now that the threat was dealt with when Sora suddenly twisted towards the east, ignoring the group of leaf ninja. Biba sniffed the air and frowned. "Someone's coming." "Another enemy?" Sasuke queried. "Oh no. The scent is kind of familiar, but different." Sora snarled, three chakra tails lashing as he bared his teeth at the shadows in the trees. Sasuke was sorely tempted to slap a jinjutsu on the guy, but his last attempt hadn't worked. The nine tails inside of Sora was a primal, raging thing that kept his chakra too disrupted for jinjutsu to work. He saw figures emerging from the darkness. The first one made his gut clench with trepidation. Gaara. The ex-ant ninja's brow was furrowed and his arms were crossed. His eyes had changed from what Sasuke remembered, the sclera were black, the eyes twin, golden stars. The gourd at his back had become a long, armored tail. Just behind Gaara was a stranger Sasuke did not recognize, though he had no doubt this one was also a jinchuriki. He was a huge man covered in armor, concealing nearly all of his body. 5 tails each slender and white, seemingly covered in fur swayed behind him. Unlike his ally, however, branching white horns with gold tips protruded from the large red kasa atop his head. The third and last newcomer landed deftly on a large branch overlooking the fight. He heard Hinata's breath hitch somewhere behind him. Sasuke felt ice fill his veins. It was Naruto. His former teammate looked like a demon, even compared to the other jinchuriki. Taller than Sasuke now, though not by much, he donned a red and black kimono as opposed to his old ninja uniform. But he had long fox-like ears atop his head, where the blonde hair was longer than Sasuke remembered. His fingers and toes had claws, and 9 long red-orange tails bristled behind him. His eyes had slit pupils and occasionally flickered from blue to red. Naruto stared down at Sora. The boy glared right back. None of the jinchuriki so much as twitched for several moments. "What the hell are you supposed to be?" Naruto growled, baring sharp canine teeth. He didn't even look at his old friends. Sora howled and jumped at him. With a manic slash, he annihilated the tree Naruto stood upon, but the jinchuriki leapt high into the air with deft grace. He seemed utterly unimpressed by the attack, forming a sign with his hands. Sasuke caught movement out of the corner of his eye and barely snatched Hanabi by the collar. "Absolutely not. But stay with your sister," he ordered, and Hanabi froze. Sasuke was relieved when she hurried to Hinata's side. The older girl had barely breathed since Naruto appeared. At least his student would be focused on something other than the fight. Any plans to engage, however, were put to the wayside as 4 of Naruto's clones scattered around the jinchuriki and created a barrier seal formation. Sasuke and the rest of the leaf ninja hesitated, unsure how dangerous the jutsu was. Then Sora let out a roar. A shockwave burst from his position as the chakra levels spiked dramatically. Sasuke's eyes flicked over to see what had happened. The boy had changed into something Sasuke could only describe as a miniature version of the 9 tails. Red-black chakra covered his body, 4 tails now behind him. He had a pair of fox-like ears, claws, and his teeth had all sharpened into vicious points. The eyes burned bright white, the gaping maw void. Naruto and the other jinchuriki appeared unperturbed. They charged Sora regardless. Sasuke tried to use his Sharingan on one of the clones creating it, but Naruto had been smart enough to ensure his clones kept their eyes closed. So much for that plan. Shikamaru seemed to be trying something with his shadow possession, but any attempts by the others were so far fruitless. He heard a feral scream as Sora lunged at Gaara. Sasuke waited for the jinchuriki's absolute defense to come into play. Gaara-san did emerge from the gourd, but the tail shot over his head like a scorpion stinger, which hammered his enemy face first into the dirt. It didn't end there, though. Shukaku's tail yanked Sora back up and smashed him into the ground over and over. Once Sora was suitably stunned, he was hurled at the armored jinchuriki. The huge man drove a kick into Sora's torso, punting him straight upwards with enough force to unleash a shockwave that was only contained by the barrier. Naruto leapt after him. At their height, Naruto snatched Sora in his claws, dragged him back down to earth, and crushed him in a devastating impact. The cloud of debris blocked everyone's side of the barrier interior. Sasuke could only wait and watch. The others had stopped trying to get in, at least for the moment. The dust settled and Sasuke caught sight of Sora at last, still in his four-tailed form, but limp and perhaps if not unconscious, at least too stunned to move. Naruto's 9 tails held the false jinchuriki up in the air. 4 of them wrapped around Sora's tails, 4 more took each of his limbs, and the last appeared to be strangling him. Gaara and the armored man had approached, studying Sora's shape with a little interest. No. Sasuke jerked as Sora's father. Damn, he'd completely forgotten about the man in the chaos. Tried to get to the barrier, but to no avail. Asuma wasn't about to let him get away. Azuma's teeth gnashed. What do you think you're doing, Sora? Take the 9 tails power for yourself. I made you for this exact purpose. Gaara's eyes flickered to the man before he looked back at Sora. An artificial jinchuriki to take the real one's power. Funny joke, Naruto sneered, reaching up to place his hand on Sora's belly. What sort of garbage seal is this? I could do better when I was 13. Azuma snarled, but his duel with Asuma kept him from interfering. Not that the Leaf Ninja or the Jinchuriki, for that matter, would have let him approach regardless. Naruto's hand pressed more firmly to Sora and within moments, the false Jinchuriki's chakra cloak was being sucked away. Sora screeched, flailing to escape, but the foxtails holding him would not relinquish their grip. His animal howl faded to a human shriek so suddenly that Sasuke flinched. Sora's flesh was raw and red, as if he'd been badly burned. His chakra tails disappeared as the power was transferred to Naruto. With those gone, the foxtails of the true 9 tails took to holding the boy's writhing shape. It didn't take long at all before all the 9 tails chakra had been siphoned from Sora. The boy went limp, unconscious, and Naruto's tails dropped him like a sack of potatoes. Azuma howled in rage, but the Jinchuriki didn't react in the slightest. Naruto flexed his claws a bit, considering the power. Huh. There really wasn't much, the blonde muttered. I'm surprised he got a version 2 form out of that. At least now we know why Kurama was agitated recently, the armored Jinchuriki commented. Naruto nodded. We're done here. He made a hand sign and his clones all popped out of existence. The barrier faded, but none of the Leaf Ninja moved to attack. Even Yamato, first Hokage's power or no, was hesitant to anger the 3 missing nin. Sasuke didn't really blame them. The Jinchuriki had handled Sora so casually it was a little frightening. The Leaf Ninja would certainly have overwhelmed him with a little more time, but Naruto and his allies didn't even seem tired. Suddenly a blur darted at the Jinchuriki from Sasuke's right and he realized with horror that it was Hanabi, who ignored her sister's desperate cry. Swearing, he lunged to stop her. Another commotion made itself known nearby, but he was too fixated on Hanabi to see Kazuma coming. The traitor got to Hanabi first, snatching the girl and pressing a kunai against her throat. Sasuke felt fury surge through him. Stupid, how could he have missed the man getting away from Asuma? Azuma backed off, eyes flicking from the Leaf Ninja to the Jinchuriki and back again. He kept Hanabi close. The kunai dug in enough for blood to trickle down her skin. She tried to shift her hands, maybe to hit a chakra point on her captor, but the traitor snarled. If you so much as twitch without my say-so, I'll kill you, girl. Sasuke glanced at the Jinchuriki and realized the group had paused to watch. Naruto, he thought, looked angry. The blue eyes shifted completely to red as the teenager twisted fully to face Kazuma. Follow me and sheet eyes, Kazuma declared. This is not the end. I will be avenged. The land of fire will be remade. My ambition will not. Sasuke wasn't sure what happened next. It was too fast. All he knew was that there was a spray of blood that drenched Hanabi when Kazuma's head. He didn't know. It was just gone. The body slumped to the ground, red spouting from the neck. Hanabi looked shell-shocked, positively soaking in blood as she tried to process what had happened. Naruto was standing behind her now, leering down at the headless corpse. Every Leaf Ninja stared at Kazuma's remains, briefly overcome with horror for how swiftly Naruto had. What exactly had he done? Sasuke watched his old teammate lean down a little to mutter into Hanabi's ear. The girl flinched, but didn't otherwise move. Whatever he said, it was brief enough that when Sasuke began to approach, the blonde vanished. He reappeared beside his allies. One of his hands was dripping red. The Jinchuriki barely spared the Leaf Ninja a glance before all 3 of them darted off into the night, leaving a scene of veritable carnage in their wake. Once cleanup of the battle was done with, Sasuke escorted Hanabi and Hinata back to the Hyuga compound. They would have been fine on their own, but Hanabi was still a little shell-shocked and he was sure Hinata was probably also out of it. Naruto's appearance had thrown them all off balance. The walk to the compound was mostly silent. Only when they were inside of their home did the girls relax just the slightest. Sasuke broke the quiet spell then. What did he tell you? The question was directed at Hanabi. She stiffened briefly and he saw her fists clench. He told me not to get caught again, she ground out through her teeth. Because it would upset Hinata if something happened to me. Like he has any right to tell me that. Hanabi, it's not his fault, Hinata frowned. I've told you before, if he hadn't left, we've been over this. I don't blame him for his decision. How can you defend him? Hanabi stopped walking to stare at Hinata. He abandoned the village. And if it weren't for him, you wouldn't have. Hanabi, Sasuke interrupted. She glanced at him, met the stern eyes, and deflated. He repressed a sigh. Truthfully, he didn't blame her for being angry. It was a fury he understood well. But she didn't have a grip on it, and he wanted to spare his student the consequences of losing control. He, after all, had learned the hard way. You're on cat retrieval duty for a week, he told the girl. Hanabi nodded glumly. She knew she'd messed up big time, disobeying his orders the way she had. Sasuke didn't need to explain. They reached the entrance to the compound, where he left them to retire. Sasuke watched them go for a few moments before twisting and slipping away down the dark streets towards his own residence. He knew something was wrong as soon as he stepped inside the house. Sasuke was the only person who lived in the old Uchiha compound these days, and he knew how that solitude felt keenly. He kept his katana handy, closing the door behind him as he made his way to the silent dining room. His Sharingan was activated just in case. Never thought you'd be a sensei. Sasuke stilled, the grip on his sword tightening as he glanced towards the kitchen. Studying the picture he owned of him and his genin team was a shape both familiar and strange to him. Naruto, naturally. His foxtails were mostly stationary, although they swayed just the slightest like a lazy cat's. The jinchuriki's back was turned to him, but clearly he was aware of Sasuke's presence. This is my house. I hope so, given the pictures, Naruto snarked. He glanced over his shoulder and those red eyes met Sasuke's. He didn't let his Sharingan fade despite the clear distaste in his former teammate's face. What are you doing here? I have questions. Fuck yourself. You cut my eye out. You used the Sharingan on me, Naruto countered, twisting fully to face him. I warned you that I wouldn't let it control me. Sasuke's hand drew his sword just a fraction from its sheath. So why are you here? What were Hanabi and Hinata talking about? What happened after I left? His jaw clenched. You were following us. I was making sure they got home safe. At a distance. Sasuke was really tempted to attack him, but truth be told, he didn't know what Naruto was capable of anymore. He'd expanded his repertoire of sealing techniques, and his speed was insane just from the brief display he'd put on when murdering Kazuma. He also didn't want to destroy his house. He'd play nice for now. Fine, but you have to answer questions from me, too. Naruto's eyes narrowed. About what? Deal or no deal? What are you going to do if I refuse? I could just beat the life out of you and get my answers that way. You didn't have it in you to kill me before, and I don't think you'll kill me now. It was a gamble to press him like that from the way Naruto glowered. Sasuke thought briefly he'd pushed too far, but the jinchuriki's lashing tails settled after a few moments. Fine. Deal. Now what happened after I left? Sasuke gathered his thoughts before he spoke. Tsunade got me set up with a new eye. Thanks for that by the way, you prick. We sent out more search missions for you. The Sand and Waterfall villages coordinated with us, but we never found anything. Last few years, the whole class got to Chunin rank. I reached Jonin with a few others. You know what I was asking? Naruto interrupted him with an edge to his voice. Stop avoiding the question. What happened to Hinata? Why do you even care? Sasuke barely got the words out before he was being slammed against the wall. He gasped as a hand clenched around his throat and powerful tails seized his limbs to prevent him from escaping. What happened? Naruto hissed. He loosened his grip just enough for Sasuke to breathe. I don't know the specifics, Sasuke wheezed, scowling at his former friend. I know her dad and the Hyuga elders got into an argument shortly after you abandoned the village. Hinata told Tsunade that you had planned on leaving after our fight at the Valley of the End. I told her she could tell the truth afterwards if it kept her out of trouble. Yeah, that wound up not working. Sasuke, I swear I'll rip your other eye out if you don't. Did you see her forehead protector? She doesn't wear it around her neck anymore. Not ever. Naruto faltered, frowning. His mouth parted slightly as if he were about to ask, and then Sasuke felt a grudging sense of pity as Naruto's face went white with nothing less than pure horror. No. From what I know, her dad argued against it, but the elders intervened when he was away for a conference with the daimyo of the Land of Fire. Tsunade was furious when she found out. Hinata didn't do anything. I don't know why the elders did what they did. Where are they? Naruto demanded. What are you going to do? Kill them. If they can do this, they can undo this. Do you think no one's tried? Hinata's dad has been arguing with the elders ever since it happened, but they won't give the information up. They're not even imprisoned, are they? It was declared an inter-clan conflict and left for the Hyuga to deal with. Hinata's father legally can't persecute them because it's nothing the elders haven't done before. They did it to his brother, and since Hinata's no longer the heiress, Naruto snarled and stormed away, releasing Sasuke from his grip. He watched the jinchuriki warily, he wasn't sure if he could take him down at this point. His chances were looking pretty low, all things considered. I question now, Sasuke told him. His old friend spun to face him, looking incredulous as if he had some sort of death wish. You said there were 3 Uchiha left at the Valley of the End. Who's the third? The guy that stole the fox 16 years ago. I don't know his name, Naruto answered, perhaps surprisingly, without arguing. He looked more annoyed by the mention of the mystery Uchiha than anything. Itachi thought it was Madara Uchiha, but the Nine Tails knows Madara's chakra. It wasn't him. He'd be dead by now, anyway. All I know for sure is that he's a part of the Akatsuki. The Akatsuki. They'd been quiet in recent years, nothing nearly so dramatic as their failed attempt to kidnap Naruto. Jiraiya had been terribly suspicious about their silence, but hadn't uncovered anything concrete about their goals. We're done here, Naruto decided suddenly. He strode towards the door. Would you leave me alive? Sasuke demanded. You said you wanted me dead. Why didn't you go through with it? The jinchuriki paused only briefly, staring at his former teammate with a slightly troubled expression. I'm still trying to work that out. Just stay out of my way, alright. He vanished before Sasuke could fire off a retort. The Uchiha sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose, and resigned himself to another meeting with Tsunade. She needed to know Naruto had gotten back into the village. It was going to be a long night. A week after the incident with Sora and Kazuma saw Hinata walking home from dinner at Kurenai's house. She'd spent a great deal of time with Kurenai as her sensei's pregnancy progressed. Her and Asuma had quietly married before her belly really began to show. They'd invited their students and a few of their peers, but the ceremony itself had been very private. She was due to give birth within the next couple of months. Hinata had been so excited she and Ino had been on several trips with Kurenai to get things for the baby, seeing as the boys on their teams had little interest in such things. Well, Shino actually didn't mind helping. He seemed to think he made them uncomfortable, so he stayed out of it for the most part, but he was happy to offer his input from time to time. Biba, Shikamaru, and Choji, though? No, not a chance. Her lips twitched up at the thought of her friends. They'd all been going on a lot of simple missions to make some extra cash specifically to buy gifts for the new family. It wasn't like Kurenai and Asuma were wanting for money, but the thoughtfulness was appreciated. She wished her own family could be so happy. Oh, she was closer to her father, Hanabi, and Neji than ever, but it was overshadowed by the aftermath of Naruto leaving the village 3 years prior. None of them had expected things to go so wrong. Hinata sighed in the cold December air, watching her breath fog up. She hadn't been able to completely stop thinking about Naruto after he'd left. He had been a presence in the back of her mind, always wondering where he was and if he was doing well. His recent appearance had brought such thoughts up more than ever. Seeing him again had been well, the circumstances hadn't been good, but he'd looked. She tilted her head back to look at the stars overhead. Did he ever think about her the way she thought of him? She couldn't help but wonder if he'd just left his life here behind him when he'd abandoned the Leaf Village. The idea of her friend dismissing her completely from his mind had been the cause of several sleepless nights. But then he'd gone and saved Hanabi, told her not to get caught because it would upset Hinata. He'd even interrogated Sasuke that same night regarding her. The Uchiha heir had been disgruntled and annoyed by that when he told her, but more concerning was the fury Naruto had worked himself into. Hinata was worried he'd do something reckless, knowing what he knew. She brought her eyes back down to the street and blinked. A small red fox trotted out of an alley just a few paces ahead of her. It stared at the girl, tail swishing gently. Red eyes gleamed, a shade she'd seen before, but never in a common fox. Her breath caught and she stopped in her tracks. The fox did not move for several moments, then turned and padded back into the alley. It paused only briefly to look back at her as if checking to see if she would follow. She definitely shouldn't have, but rationality seemed to leave her when it came to him. Hinata glanced around carefully before she slipped into the alley after the fox. It kept walking ahead, slipping through shadows until they were hidden under a small alcove in one of the quietest parts of the village. Only then did the fox change shape and in its place was. She felt her heart rise into her throat. He didn't have the features of the 9 tails he'd had when last she saw him. His hair was a little longer and he was again wearing that red and black kimono. He was taller than her by almost a full head, lean and strong and older, but it was still him. His mouth twitched into a hesitant smile. Hi. Hi, her response was a hoarse whisper. Was she going to faint? Please no, she had definitely left that sort of response behind her. Naruto's eyes were wonderfully blue, studying her in silence for a minute before he spoke again. You got taller. Hinata raised an eyebrow and made a gesture regarding the height difference between them. The hesitance in his smile faded, becoming more genuine, and her heart stuttered. He had been sweet and kind as a boy, but now he was dangerously handsome, with a gleam in his eyes and a crooked smile that suited him far too well. She was blushing. Her face hadn't felt this hot in a long time. He seemed to struggle with words for a time. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, per se, they were just drinking each other in, trying to replace the image of their friend with faces that were familiar, yet not quite the same. I like your hair, he said at last. That did no favors for the heat roiling off her face. He couldn't just say things like that, it wasn't fair. "Kimono," she replied lamely, gesturing to the outfit. Naruto looked down at it. "Yeah. They're easier on me when I need to transform. I think Kurama likes them, too. It suits you." "I hope so." Silence again formed between them. Naruto's face lost a bit of its light as he took a deep breath. "Hinata." His hand rose, hesitantly, and hovered close to her forehead protector. She froze, but he didn't try to remove it. She watched his throat bob as he swallowed. Sasuke said, "Well, he didn't say it, but it was implied you were." Hinata bit her bottom lip so hard it almost bled. His hands moved and she thought he was going to take the protector off, but then, warm hands cupped her cheeks and tilted her head to look at him. He looked agonized. "Was it really because of me?" No, she reached up without thinking and held his wrists, squeezing tight. She'd almost forgotten what it felt like to touch him. The elders had been pushing for it for years, ever since Hanabi became heiress. They just used our talk as an excuse to get away with it, she faltered as his eyes smoldered, mouth pressed into a thin line. But his anger was harnessed quickly and his gaze rose above her eyes to the protector. Hinata let him go reluctantly and reached behind her head to undo the tie. "You don't have to. I think I need to." He didn't stop her. She pulled the protector away, shaking her hair out and exposed the caged bird seal on her forehead. Naruto's eyes flashed red for an instant. His hand rose and brushed the marked skin. Hinata just closed her eyes, soaking up his warmth despite the situation. "It's not your fault," she whispered. He breathed in loudly through his nose and she thought the exhale was shaky. He was trembling or was that her? She couldn't tell. She calmed herself enough to open her eyes again, peering up at his face. He hadn't pulled back, still holding her face in his hands with a delicacy she'd rarely seen in him. Naruto's eyes were narrowed, not with rage, well, not only with rage, it should be said, but with thought. "Give me 3 months." Hinata blinked. "What?" "Nothing." Just Naruto shook his head and pulled back reluctantly, taking his warmth with him. She shivered at the loss. "I have to go," he said. Hinata blinked. "Already?" But it made sense, he was a missing nin and a jinchuriki besides. He was one of the most wanted men in the Land of Fire. "I'll be back," Naruto promised. He reached down to her hand and squeezed it tight. "Be safe," she pleaded. Some emotion she couldn't discern flashed across his face. Then he vanished. Naruto reappeared miles away from the Leaf Village at a teleportation point he'd set up before infiltrating the village. He closed his eyes, fighting off the urge to just run back and take Hinata away, where he could keep her safe from the people that had seen her marked so cruelly. But he knew he couldn't do that. He would never steal her against her will. One of his clones slipped out of the shadows and handed over 3 scrolls. Naruto studied them briefly. No trouble. None. They clearly weren't expecting someone to infiltrate the Hyuga compound of all places, the clone told him. Maybe they thought no one would be stupid enough to sneak around the home of the Byakugan. "If it works," Naruto remarked, making a sign that popped his clone out of existence. He stuffed the stolen scrolls into his bag and rushed off to the east. It was time to get back home before Han became worried and decided to come find him. He had work to do. Fu was not surprised to find Naruto the way she did. Since he'd returned from the Leaf Village 2 months ago with a handful of stolen Hyuga scrolls, he'd been holed up in his part of the Tailed Beast Temple nigh constantly. Occasionally, he would emerge for meals or to retrieve more ink and paper from Rashi. His Jinchuriki family checked in on him a few times each day, but they'd seen him get like this before. There was no stopping the stubborn boy once he fixated on a problem. So there Fu was, knocking on the door and receiving a half-aware grunt in response to come in. Part of Kurama's temple had been set up as a study for Naruto to work on seals and such, they all had one, which was exactly where she found him sitting. He was buried in paperwork and scrap seals that were haphazardly thrown onto the floor. Failures, she assumed. There were many. "When was the last time you ate?" "A few hours ago." Trick question. "You haven't eaten since last night," she corrected dryly. Naruto looked at her over his shoulder. Fu winced at the dark bruises under his eyes. "Was busy. I noticed, funnily enough. Which is why I'm here to intervene. I promise I'll eat now." "Excellent, I'm glad we agree." He frowned at her. "Fu, come on. Just a little longer." She sighed and strode up to him, setting her hands on his shoulders. "I admire you for working so hard, but I think you know at this point you aren't going to make any progress until you get some food. And sleep." "I sleep. You haven't slept in 2 days. You don't know that." "I do," Kurama rumbled between them. The fox sounded exasperated. "My chakra might keep you going, but it cannot substitute for actual sleep." Naruto huffed. Fu couldn't help but grin at his annoyance. "You missed Gaara and Han this morning." "Where'd they go?" "The Land of Lightning. Like we've been planning this past week." He jolted into a moment of wide-eyed awareness. "Wait, what? Was that today?" "Oh shit, Fu snorted into a fit of giggles. "You were really focused." They didn't want to distract you, but Han asked me to make sure you got some proper rest. I'm sorry, he groaned. Don't be. We know why you're working so hard. None of us blame you. He sighed, finally sounding as tired as he looked. Fu knew him well enough to realize he was going to crash any minute now that his fatigue was catching up with him. Alright mister, let's get some actual food in your stomach before you pass out on me. Naruto rubbed at his eyes, and Fu took that as her cue to haul him to his feet, guiding him to the temple kitchen where they could eat. Rashi was already there, polishing off a bowl of stew, when they walked in. He looked up at the pair and nodded to them. I see you pulled him out of his cave. That's rich, coming from you, Naruto grumbled. Eat, boy. You won't make any progress if you don't give your body a chance to recover. Naruto growled half-heartedly at him, but stumbled away to find food with Fu not far behind. They were just sitting down when more company arrived. Ah. Naruto's here. That was Hadaru, one of the more recent additions to the temple, followed closely by her master Utakata the Six-Tails Jinchuriki. The pair of them had joined roughly a year ago when the tailed beasts made contact with Seiken. There had been a brief crisis concerning Hadaru and her clan, but it had been resolved quickly enough. They had chosen to come along when the Jinchuriki invited them. Hadaru wasn't a Jinchuriki, but none of them were about to separate her from Utakata. Besides, it wasn't like she was the only normal human to take up residence on the islands around the Tailed Beast Temple in recent years, though she was the only one actually living there. Mornin' Hadaru. Mornin' Utakata, Naruto mumbled. It is past noon, Utakata told him, raising an elegant eyebrow. Sheesh, kid. You sound drunk. Seiken, the Six Tails, spoke into their minds. He might as well be, Kurama admitted. Shut up, Naruto shoved his spoon into some of the stew Rashi had prepared and began to eat, eyes drooping. Fu jabbed her fork in Hadaru's direction. Hey, I forgot to ask yesterday. Did you pull off that water-style jutsu I showed you? I know it uses up a lot of chakra. I almost have it, Hadaru replied as she and Utakata began to gather some food for themselves. I don't quite have the control right, though. Do you think you could show it to me again later? Yeah. I just gotta make sure Naruto eats. It's only a matter of time before he. Naruto's head fell to the table with a soft thump, barely missing his stew, and within moments he was snoring. Yep, there it is, Fu gave the now unconscious teenager a sympathetic pat on the back. Hadaru hid a small smile behind her hand. Rashi muttered something about stubborn children. But grief, Kurama sighed. In hindsight, Gaara had known his and Han's mission to the Land of Lightning was likely to not go as quietly as they'd planned. It came with the territory of being missing Nin and Jinchuriki to boot. It had been decided the pair of them would try to reach out and make contact with the two hidden cloud Jinchuriki. Han was the best of the bunch at diplomacy, and Gaara had picked up a thing or two from him over the years. Fu was a bit too energetic and eager for such missions. Naruto had gotten pretty good, but he was currently fixated on tearing apart every facet of the caged bird seal. Utakata wished to focus on Hadaru's training for the time being. Rashi was Rashi. At least the Land of Lightning wasn't as far from their home as the Land of Earth. It was hardly the lengthy trip Gaara, Naruto, and Fu had taken nearly 3 years ago. Even so, he really would have preferred to not encounter the Akatsuki. They'd sensed the fight from some distance. Shukaku and Kakuo had picked up on the two tails chakra running rampant, but it had grown alarmingly weak the closer they got. Han and Gaara had only needed to glimpse the destroyed town before they moved in. They would have normally been more cautious, but Matatabi's Jinchuriki appeared to be on the brink of death. Desperate times called for desperate measures. Two men with the trademark Akatsuki cloaks were at the center of the devastation, with the Jinchuriki barely alive. Gaara noted that one of them stood in the center of a bizarre diagram formed from blood. His skin had turned black and a skeleton pattern had formed over his body, a jutsu, perhaps. Whatever the case, their arrival caught the weary Akatsuki off guard. Han and Gaara immediately went on the assault. The fuck is Gaara silenced the one standing in the diagram, snatching him with sand and dragging him out. Immediately, his skin changed to a more natural paler tone. So it was probably a jutsu, after all. He made a note of it. The other Akatsuki barely leapt out of the way as Han's steam armor propelled him forward, delivering a savage blow that destroyed even more of the already ruined town. He spat elemental blasts at Han, though it was clear his chakra had been drained by his fight with Matatabi's Jinchuriki. A single steam blast with nothing held back blew apart the wind and fire combination, as though it weren't even there. Han engaged the Akatsuki in hand-to-hand combat, while Gaara dealt with his partner. The triple-bladed scythe was hurled at him and contemptuously blocked by his sand. Gaara seized the weapon and hurled it away from its master, who shouted angrily. He did not care. The Jinchuriki had discussed the Akatsuki over the years. Each and every one of them was to be killed on sight. Gaara wrapped the man in his sand and crushed, ruthless in his application of force. He waited for a few moments for the screams to subside, but they never did. He frowned and applied more pressure. Still the screams persisted. Shut him up already. Shukaku growled. Gaara wasn't sure why the Akatsuki wasn't dead, so he went the extra mile. Sand forced its way down the man's throat, into his nostrils, his eyes wherever he could find a way inside the Akatsuki's body. Pretty soon, he was choking on the sand, still trapped in the tomb and utterly helpless. His chakra was muted, but he still wasn't dead. Is he immortal? Gaara wondered aloud. Even Shukaku seemed a little disturbed. Dunno. You crushed him up good. It's not like he can move, though. Trap his ass and get to Matatabi's jinchuriki before she taps out. He didn't have any better ideas, so Gaara buried the Akatsuki in a few tons of rubble, shifted with his sand and piled on for good measure, and hurried over to the dying jinchuriki. He remained aware of the man's chakra still persisting. Maybe he really couldn't die. Matatabi's jinchuriki, however, was in dire straits. He was quick to press his hands to the woman's torso and funneled as much of Shukaku's chakra into her body as he could. Slowly, the tailed beast within her stirred from its weakened state and made groggy contact with them. Shukaku. You ain't looking so good there, kitty, Shukaku snarked. The Akatsuki they caught us by surprise. We thought they were dead. But they can't die. I killed the one with the mask twice over. I burned the one with the scythe. Well, we stuffed him with sand and crushed him into pulp. Even if he's alive, he can't move, the tanuki grunted. Kakuo's handling the other one. Can't believe you got your ass kicked this badly. The cat's voice took on an annoyed tone. Honestly, fuck yourself. Enough, Gaara cut their argument off. Save your strength. Your jinchuriki is in bad shape. She needs to heal or you'll both die. Matatabi seemed too tired to acknowledge that with anything more than a tired grunt. As her chakra was replenished, the jinchuriki began to heal at a better pace. Gaara relaxed a bit as the heavy damage was repaired with that familiar, supernatural speed. Still, the jinchuriki remained unconscious. But as she recovered, Matatabi spoke in their minds again. Jayuki is coming. Yeah, I bet the Raikage's pissed if he's heard about the Akatsuki pulling this off, Shukaku snickered. No. Now. I can sense him. Gaara froze as a massive chakra closed the distance and lunged at him. He and Shukaku reacted as one, sand rising with a chakra cloak to block the electrified blades that stabbed at him. Stop, Matatabi's voice was strained, but it was enough. The new jinchuriki paused and Gaara warily did not retaliate. Not enemies. The chakra cloak enveloping Jayuki's jinchuriki, the eight tails, Gaara realized slowly faded and he matched the man. The blades were sheathed as he knelt and added his own chakra to the surge, attempting to heal Matatabi and her host. What happened? Akatsuki, Gaara answered, glancing over his shoulder. He could still hear the sounds of fighting. One is down, the other is still fighting Han and Kakuo. He didn't have time to think about whether or not it was wise to trust this new jinchuriki, not with the situation as things stood. He didn't actually know how much damage the Akatsuki Han was fighting had taken. Yujiro and I are out of mortal danger now, Matatabi said. Go. He was silent for a moment more before he stood, a new chakra cloak forming, and launched himself towards the sounds of fighting. Gonna beat yo ass, cause you the last, we. Gaara heard more explosions and thunderous impacts a few moments later. He checked on the chakra signature of the Akatsuki he'd buried alive and was satisfied that it hadn't moved. He continued to heal Yujiro and Matatabi. Gaara kept himself aware of his surroundings, though the fighting had largely faded into the distance. By the time Yujiro stirred and woke up, he could sense Han and B returning. He felt the Akatsuki he'd buried alive suddenly vanish and jerked his head sharply in the direction of the body. Sand formed a defense around him and Yujiro as he picked the tomb apart. There was plenty of blood, but the Akatsuki in question was gone. Summoned away, perhaps. The news wasn't great when the other jinchuriki returned. They didn't have the second Akatsuki with them. He got away. Gaara guessed. Not sure how, Han was frowning. He looked a little banged up, but he'd already healed anything serious, from what Gaara could see. I turned his guts into putty and this guy stabbed him clean through the heart. We turned our backs for 2 seconds and he disappeared. He must have summoned his partner away, Shukaku grumbled. The other one's gone, too. Han's frown grew deeper. Not sure there's much left of him, but yes, Gaara admitted. Without you two, there wouldn't be much left of me, Yujiro croaked. Her eyes were still closed, she must have been communicating with Matatabi separately from them. The Akatsuki intend to hunt all jinchuriki for their tailed beasts, Han replied. We've heard of them. And of you, Matatabi said. You came for us as well, did you not? It was our intention to ask if you wanted to join the rest of us, Gaara admitted. He glanced from Yujiro to B. Though under the circumstances, perhaps that should wait. Agreed, a new voice Jayuki, the eight tails, Gaara assumed made itself known. Raikage will be rampaging before long. B and I will get Yujiro and Matatabi back to the hidden cloud village. You four should retreat before A gets here. Be careful, Han tipped his hat to them as Gaara and B helped Yujiro stand up. Once the two tails jinchuriki was on her feet, Gaara and Han rushed off back towards their own territory. The last thing they needed was to encounter the Raikage after fighting two Akatsuki, but if nothing else, the battle had confirmed one thing for certain. The Akatsuki had finally decided to make their move. Their hunt for the jinchuriki had resumed.